I held the last bottle up to the light and watched the mana sit even through the water, no drift, no cloud, exactly the way it was supposed to. 1,000 of them lined up on the bench behind me, capped and labeled and ready before the rest of the guild had finished their breakfast. Every potion this building sold, every alchemical beast it grew, started as water I had poured that morning. Not one of those 1,000 bottles had my name on it. The door banged open and Roderick came in the way he always came in, like the room owed him something. He called across the benches without looking at me, then louder, dragging out the word master until it curdled into a joke. I set the bottle down before I answered. "Master Roderick," I said, "did you need something?" He made a face at that, the tired little sneer he kept just for me, and told me my answer was exactly what he expected from basic research. Then he waved a hand toward the door and said the president wanted me. On his way back out, he stopped at the bench, picked up 2 of my sealed bottles, and slid them into his coat like they were his. He told me a gopher should keep his head down and run his errands, and he was gone before I could have said anything, if I had been the kind of man who still said anything. I looked at the gap in the row where the 2 bottles had been. Then I wiped my hands on my apron and followed him up. The president did not offer me a chair. He had a single sheet of paper turned to face me on the desk, the next term's budget, and he tapped it once with one finger like he was proud of it. I read down the columns. Weapon forging, up. Enchanting, up. Potions, steady. And on the line for basic research, where there had always at least been a number I could survive on, there was one word now, and the word was 0. I looked at it for a moment longer than I should have, because part of me kept waiting for it to mean something other than what it meant. Voss did not wait. In that flat, satisfied voice he used for things he had already decided, he told me basic research had produced nothing worth counting. All we did, he said, was fetch and carry for the departments that actually earned, so the money went to them. And since there was no money, there was no department. He was dissolving it. But, I started, "That isn't right. That isn't—" He cut me off before the sentence could stand up. He did not want the explanation. He did not want to hear that the water Roderick had just pocketed on the stairs came out of the department he was crossing off the page, that half the things his earners sold began in my hands. To him, the ledger was the truth, and the ledger said I made nothing. Roderick was leaning on the wall by the window with his arms folded, enjoying it, and he did not bother to hide it. Then Voss said the thing I would carry out the door with me. He told me to be grateful. Grateful, he said, that he was not firing me outright. A man who did nothing should be thankful the guild kept paying him at all. And then he told me to get back to work. I stood there in the hard, clean light of that office and let it land. All of it, the 0 and the word gopher, still fresh on the stairs, and grateful sitting on top of the pile. Years of it. Every cut, every joke, every bottle carried off in someone else's coat. Every morning I had swallowed the same words back down because saying them had never once moved the number on that page. It had all been leading here, to a single sheet of paper with nothing on my line and a man telling me to say thank you. There is a particular kind of tired that comes from being good at something no one will let you be seen doing. I had lived inside it so long I had stopped calling it anything. I made the water the whole guild drank from, and I was told I fetched and carried. I held up the floor and I was told I made nothing. And the worst of it, standing there, was not the anger. The worst of it was how small the anger had gotten, how well trained I was, how close I came even then to nodding and going back down and pouring the next 1,000 bottles for men who would never once say my name without a joke on the end of it. I did not say thank you. I did not say anything. But something had gone quiet in me that had spent years making noise, and I knew the difference. I turned around and went back down to the lab. The lab looked different when I came back to it. Nothing had changed and everything had. The benches I had kept for years were just wood now. The 1,000 bottles were just glass someone else would haul away, or forget, or let go stale, since there would be no one to make the next 1,000. I sat down and did not do anything for a while, which was its own kind of new. Then, the communication device on the corner shelf rang its small bell, and a strip of parchment fed out of it, and I tore it off out of habit more than hope. It was from Karen. I had not heard her voice in years, but I heard it in the letter anyway, loud and grinning the way she always was. She had made night. After the war, they had given her a border territory of her own, a raw stretch of the northern frontier, hers to build into something, and she wanted me to come and help her build it. Not fetch, not carry, build. She wrote it like it was obvious. Like of course it would be me. Like there was no one in the world she would rather have making the foundations of her town than the man the guild had just crossed off a page. I read it and I could not quite feel it at first. It had been so long since anyone had asked for me by name that the words did not fit the shape of the day I was having. In the academy, she used to sit on my bench past midnight and shove bread into my hand because I forgot to eat when a problem had me, and she would tell me, loud enough for the whole hall, that I was the best of us, and too stupid to know it. I had let myself forget she talked like that. I had let a lot of people teach me to forget it. 2 papers on 1 bench, a budget with a 0 on my name, a letter with my name written like it meant something. I read Karin's letter twice. Then I thought about the old president, Hammond, who used to say basic research was the cornerstone of the whole guild, and who had said it right up until the day they pushed him out. I had told myself I would leave when he left. I had stayed 3 more years and let them teach me to be small. I folded the letter and put it in my coat, next to nothing, because there was nothing else in there I wanted to keep. "I'll quit," I said, to the empty room. Saying it out loud did not feel like defeat. It felt like the first true thing I had said in that building in a long time. I did not pack in a rush. There was no rush, because I had already packed months ago, a little at a time, without letting myself admit what I was doing. Everything I owned went into the storage backpack, 1 bench of tools swallowed into a space no bag that size should hold. Then my books, then the last of my clothes from the room I had already given up. I checked my labor contract, the one that bound me to basic research and to basic research alone, and I read the clause I had read the night before until I was sure of it. Then I folded my resignation over it and walked up the stairs one last time, everything I had in the world on my back and weighing almost nothing. The office door was not shut all the way, and I could hear them before I reached it. They were carving up my department between them like a carcass. Voss was saying the whole of basic research's budget would go straight to weapon forging now, and Roderick was thanking him for it, fawning, calling the dissolution a fine decision, calling me a burden the guild was better off without. "Dead weight finally gone," he said. I stood in the corridor with my hand not quite on the door and listened to the 2 of them congratulate each other for cutting out the floor they were standing on. I have wondered since whether I would have been gentler if I had knocked and heard nothing. Probably not. But whatever thread of restraint I had left, that was where it snapped. I opened the door without knocking and walked in. Voss came up out of his satisfaction fast, angry that I had entered his office unannounced, and I let his anger go past me like weather. I crossed to the desk, and I set my resignation down on the polished wood between them, square, where they both could see it. "My business here is only this," I told him. "I'm quitting. Goodbye." Roderick sputtered off the wall. He said I couldn't quit, that there was no way I could just walk out, his voice climbing. I had the contract ready. I laid it beside the resignation and turned it so the clause faced up. "I can quit. Here, my labor contract." I let them read it. The contract bound me to basic research and nothing else. Basic research no longer existed because Voss had dissolved it himself that morning, on paper, proudly. There were no duties left to hand over because the thing I had duties to was gone. Their own signatures had cut me loose. I did not have to give notice. I did not have to train a replacement. I did not have to leave them so much as a written recipe. I could walk out the door the moment I chose to, and I chose now. It was Roderick who understood first, and only halfway. The color went out of him, and he blurted the real fear before he could stop it. Then who, he demanded, was going to make the distilled water? I looked at him, at the 2 of my bottles still bulging in his coat. "Then make it yourself," I said. "It's outside my contract anyway, and you're an alchemist. Should be easy." He opened his mouth, and nothing came out. Voss glanced at him, waiting for him to say, of course, he could replicate it. Any competent man could, and Roderick could not say it. He stood there stammering half a word, and in that little silence, the truth sat in the room with all 3 of us, plain as the 0 on the page, and I was the only one willing to look at it. Voss covered for both of them the way men like him always do. He drew himself up and told me the guild had no use for a man who could not appreciate its generosity, a steady wage for menial work, and that if I did not value it, I could get out. He gave the word menial one last push, so it would be the thing I left on. I picked up my contract and left the resignation. I did not argue, because he was, in the only sense that mattered now, right? The guild had no use for me. It just had no idea yet how much it needed me. Those are different things, and I was the only person in that building who knew it. For one breath, I let myself stand in it. Not gloating. I did not have the gloating in me yet. Just standing in the quiet fact of it, the 2 of them behind that desk, with their budget and their arrangement. So certain they had trimmed dead weight. So certain the machine would run tomorrow the way it ran today. They had signed the paper that freed me, and they thought they had signed a paper that cost them nothing. I could have told them, 1 sentence, and they would have understood exactly what was walking out the door. I found I did not want to spend the sentence. I turned my back on both of them and walked out, and I let the door swing shut behind me on its own weight, and I did not look back to watch it close. The sun hit me the moment I came out the front doors, and it hit me the way sun hits a man let out of somewhere he has been kept too long. I stood on the step for a second and just breathed the outside air. Behind me was a building that ran on water it could no longer make and did not yet know it. Ahead of me was the North Road, and at the far end of it, Quarren. and a piece of raw frontier that did not care what a ledger said I was worth. I took a scroll from my coat and unrolled it and spoke the word, and the seal broke open with a small, clean sound. Ippo came out of it all at once, my small, round, 8-legged mount, saddled and ready, blinking at the light and stamping his many feet like he had been waiting on this longer than I had. He pushed his broad head against my chest, and I put a hand between his eyes and felt something in me settle that had not been settled in years. I climbed up. The city went on around me, carts and criers, and the guild at my back with its lights on. All of it certain the day was ordinary. For years I had walked these same streets with my head down, one more errand in an apron, and every face that passed had looked straight through me. Let them look through me one more time. It would be the last morning any of them got me for free. I turned Ippo north and let him run, and I rode out of the capital toward the frontier, owing them nothing, carrying everything, and I did not tell a single one of them what they had just thrown away. They would find out on their own. I could wait. For 3 days I let Hippo run, and the capital fell off behind me like a coat I never wanted. No bottles, no budget sheet, no one on a high floor deciding what I was worth. Just the road going north, the wind, and 8 blunt feet eating the ground under me. Karin's letter had promised me a place. I was in no hurry to get there. For the first time in years, I had time to spend, and I spent it looking at things. I turned Ippo off the road toward a lake I remembered, meaning to gather herbs while the light was good. Old habit. A man who has made 1,000 potions a day does not stop noticing a good herb field just because no one is paying him for it. Then Ippo stopped. His tail went flat and stiff, and he made a low sound in his chest I had learned to trust more than my own eyes. "What is it?" I said, already sliding down. I went in careful, checking the grass for wire and pit and rune the way you check anything on a frontier road. There was nothing set to catch me. What there was a woman, face down in the meadow with one arm thrown out like she had been reaching for something when she fell. I turned her over. Silver hair, gray skin, and across her face a black mark, spread out in fine branches like ink dropped in water. Blue robes, cut a certain way at the collar. A priestess knight. The goddess of reckoning kept knights like her, and they did not lie down in fields. "Show me," I said, and cracked a diagnostic scroll open over her. The transcription came up under my hands, and it told me 2 separate things at once. The fever was poison, familiar's venom, gone in through a torn wound in her side and now working through the whole of her. That I could fix. The mark on her face was the other thing, a curse. Not the kind that kills you where you stand, the slow kind, a tracking mark, the sort that does one job only and does it forever. It tells whoever said it exactly where the marked one is, which meant someone had said it, and that someone knew right now that she was here. I looked at the tree line once, slow, and saw nothing, and did not like that I saw nothing. Then I put it away. First the poison, then the questions. "Guard her," I told Ippo, and left him planted over her like a boulder with legs. I took the empty bottle from my pack and ran for the herb field. The field had been picked, not stripped, but thinned, neat, the way a person harvests who means to come back. Someone worked this land. I filed that away with the rest of it and took only what I needed, 3 herbs and no more. 1 to close a wound, 1 to rebuild what the poison had eaten, 1 to pull the venom out. I did not want to leave whoever tended this place short. Then I went down to the water, and I did the work they used to call menial. My old teacher told me once that alchemists are nothing more than handymen. He said it fondly. Half the guild said it to my face and did not. I laid the first scroll on the shore and released it, and the weight went out of 5 things at once. The 3 herbs, the bottle, and a rope of lake water lifting straight up out of the surface, all of it hanging in the air in front of me, turning slow. I took the water first. The second scroll is mine, my own design, and no distillery in the capital has its equal. I ran it, and I reached into the floating water with my mana and started taking things out of it. Silt, salt, the memory of every rock it had ever run over. I took it down and down, past clean, past pure, to the thing under pure. Water with nothing left in it at all but water. Ultimate pure water is not calm. Emptied out that far, it wants. I let go of my hold on it, and it went for the herbs like something starving, and the green came out of them in a rush and hung there, a green as deep as a bottle held to the sun. Then the harder half. I ran the second scroll again over the green, and this time I was not taking things out. I was tuning what was left, folding it toward one shape and one shape only. Her fever, her wound, the exact poison in the exact woman lying in the grass with my mount standing over her. This is the part no distillery does. This is the part that takes a decade of ruined batches to learn. The small constant corrections, a hair more pull here, a breath less there. The whole thing balanced on the edge of a knife the entire time, and one wrong pressure turning it to sludge. My hands remembered it even when the rest of me had stopped believing it was worth anything. The green thickened, the green warmed, and then, all at once, it went gold. A clean, lit gold that threw light up onto my face off the water, and I knew before I finished that it had come out right. I dropped the third scroll under it and fixed it, held that gold in place, so it would stay gold and not slide back into something ordinary. Then, I eased the weight back into the bottle and let the potion pour down into it, every thread of it, and pressed the seal home. I held it up. It sat there glowing between my fingers like I had bottled a piece of afternoon. Been a while, I said to no one. Decent enough. The whole of it had taken less time than a slow breakfast. Back home, it would have been one of 1,000, made yawning, and no man in that building would have looked at it twice. I turned and ran back for the meadow. I heard Ippo before I saw him. Not the low warning sound now, a full roar, and when I came over the rise, he was up on his hind feet, all his front feet coming down again and again on one spot in the grass, and something under them kept sliding out from the edges. Something with no proper shape, a smear of dark that moved on its own. I did not slow down. I pulled a stamina potion as I ran and threw it, and it broke across his broad back and soaked in, and Ippo sharpened all at once the way a tired man does after cold water. He reared higher and came down in a flurry. 4 strikes, 5, and on the last one, the dark thing stopped sliding and simply smeared, and did not gather itself again. He lifted his foot to show me. Proud, a black stain worked into the sole like tar. Well done, I said, and meant it. I crouched and looked at the stain and felt the cold come back into my chest. I had seen that residue before, in another life, on other jobs. A familiar, a curse user's familiar, sent to run down exactly one person. Whoever had marked her face had sent this thing to finish what the poison started, and this thing had come within one loyal mount of doing it, which meant the caster would send another. That was the whole trouble with a tracking curse. You could kill the hound, the hunter still knew the road. Later, I told myself, out loud, and went to her. I found the tear in her robe at the side and the wound under it, shallow, ugly. The mouth of it black at the edges where the venom had gone in. I unstoppered the bottle and touched a single drop to the cut. The gold ran out of that one drop and wrapped her whole body in light, soft at first, then bright enough that I sat back on my heels. When it faded, the wound was not bandaged. It was gone, closed clean as if it had never opened. And under my hand, her breathing changed, dragged, caught, and her eyes came open. They found me first, then the sword lying an arm's length off, and she went for the sword. I pointed at the flat black stain in the grass before her hand closed on the hilt. The enemy's already dealt with, I said. That was it? It won't get up again. She stopped. Her eyes went from the stain to Ippo, to me, measuring, and her hand came off the sword by degrees. Not because she trusted me, but because she had counted the field and found nothing left in it to fight. You saved me, she said. Her voice was formal, even flat on her back. You have my thanks. Now tell me the price of that potion. I nearly said the guild, old habit, the word right there in my mouth. I swallowed it. Just a traveling alchemist, I told her. There's no price. It isn't much. She tried to sit up to argue, and the poison still in her took her legs out, and she went back down hard. I crouched. The wound's closed, I said. The venom that went through the rest of you isn't. What's left in the bottle handles that. Drink it. It's free. That was the wrong word to a woman like her. She shook her head against the grass, silver hair spilling, and set her jaw. No. Forgive my caution. Your goodwill is plainly real, but that is no common potion. I can see what it is. I will not take a treasure for nothing. I was tired of standing in a field arguing a dying woman into living, so I gave her a price she could carry. Then here's the contract, I said. I'm Rust, a traveling alchemist, bound north to serve Countess Karine on the border. Someday, calamity may come for me. When it does, lend me that sword. Call it paid. Something in her face changed then, the way stone changes when you finally find the seam. She got one hand under herself, not to rise, only to face me square, and she said it like an oath because it was one. I am Terra, knight of the goddess of reckoning, third of her 3 swords. She took a breath that shook. I accept this debt. When your calamity comes, I will be the blade that cuts it apart. I swear it on my sword. I handed her the bottle. She drank it down. I watched the gold go into her, and this time I was not looking at my own craft. I was looking at what it did. The color came up under her gray skin first, a warmth chasing out from her chest to her hands. The shaking stopped. Her breathing dropped into something deep and even. The venom I had built that potion to burn out was burning out, exactly as tuned, and that much I had expected. What I had not expected was her face, the black mark, the branching curse laid across her cheek. The tracking mark I had already decided I would have to deal with the hard way later began to fade. Not smear, not lift like a stain. Dissolve, thread by fine thread. The gold light finding each black branch, and running along it the way frost runs backward off a window in the sun, retreating to the finest ends and letting go. I had spent the whole ride telling myself the curse was a separate problem, a caster to find, a mark to break with tools I did not have on me. And here it was, coming apart on its own, under a potion I had built for a different job entirely, unmaking itself as easily as breath fogging off glass, until the last thread thinned to nothing and her skin was only skin. I had not aimed at the curse, I had aimed at the poison. The potion had taken the curse anyway, because when you make water pure enough, it stops being ordinary water at all, and there are things holy water cannot touch that the clean, first nameless kind still can. Her hand went up to her own cheek. She felt smooth skin where the mark had been, and her eyes went wide and wet. "It's gone," she said, and her voice broke on it. "A curse no holy water could lift, and it's gone." And then the discipline went out of her all at once, and she wept, openly, both hands over her face, in the middle of a darkening field in front of a stranger. And I, who had done it by accident, had no idea at all what to do with a grateful woman crying. Gratitude was never a thing I got much practice at, so I did the coward's thing. I stood, brushed the grass off my knees, and whistled Ippo over. "I've business north," I said, which was true enough. "Look after yourself, Tara." She called after me, half up on one knee, but I was already in the saddle, and Ippo was already moving, and the wind took whatever she said. I did not look back. A man can only stand so much thanks. But I carried two things out of that field that I had not ridden in with. One was a sword sworn to me for the worst day of my life, whenever it decided to come. The other was colder, and I did not set it down for a long while as Ippo ran on into the dark. Someone out there had marked her to be hunted. Someone I never saw, who had never seen me, who now had one dead familiar and one broken curse to explain, and no idea whose hands had broken it. I did not know his face. I did not know his name. I only knew that the frontier I was riding toward sat under the same sky as whatever he was, and that the road north had just gotten a good deal more interesting than a handyman's road had any right to be. The broken wall was the first thing that told me the village was dying. I had been 6 days on the road by then, riding north on Hippo, with nothing but open country around me, and stamina potions to keep the both of us moving. At night, I built a fire and slept on hard ground, and the potions burned the ache out of my back by morning, so the ground never cost me a thing. I ate the pressed blocks of dried grain and fruit that Karin, years ago, had wrinkled her nose at and named grass bricks. It was a small, stupid kind of freedom, sleeping under stars I had never once seen from the floor of a guild lab. I found I liked it more than I expected to. Then, at dusk on the 6th day, I saw Tolby. I knew the name before I knew the ruin. It was the last village before the northern frontier, the final roof between the open road and Karin's border, and I had been half looking forward to it. A hot meal, a real roof. One night, I didn't have to build myself. What I rode up to instead was a wall with its teeth knocked out. Whole sections had crumbled and never been mended. A moat had been started around the far side and then abandoned, left half dug, the earth still raw where the shovels had simply stopped. I slowed Ippo to a walk and looked at it a long moment. This was practically Karin's next door neighbor. If Tolby was rotting, the rot sat one field over from the place I had crossed a kingdom to go and help build. That was not a thing I could ride past and forget. I swung down, put a hand flat against Ippo's broad side, and thanked it the way I always did, as if it understood me. Then I spoke the word. Return. White threads climbed up over its 8 legs and folded the whole enormous animal down small and quiet, back into the scroll. I rolled the scroll and slid it into my coat. I could have gone around. The frontier was north, and Tolby was only in the way. I went in. I hadn't gone 30 paces down the main street before a man stepped out to block it. He was middle-aged and thick through the shoulders, and he looked at me the way you look at one more piece of bad news walking up the road. "Who are you?" he said. It wasn't really a question. "Good day." I kept my hands where he could see them. "I'm a traveling alchemist, Rust." I wanted to ask what's happened here. Something shifted behind the glare. Not trust, but a sudden, sharp interest, the way a drowning man clocks a rope. He chewed the word over. "An alchemist." Then, half to himself, "Come with me. The chief will want to see you." He turned without waiting for an answer, and I followed him up the street, and that was when I really saw the place. It wasn't empty the way a village is empty at supper, with everyone indoors. It was empty the way a mouth is empty after the teeth come out. House after house stood dark, doors hanging open, hearths cold, a child's shoe left in one doorway where nobody had thought it worth the trip back to fetch. These weren't stragglers who had wandered off. Whole families had loaded what they could carry and gone recently, and gone all at once. I counted the dark windows as we walked and stopped counting when the counting got grim. At the end of the street stood a larger house, and over its door someone had fixed a fresh cut branch, pale barked and heavy with dark leaves. A chief's mark, I guessed, a token of who ran things here. My My eye read it a second way before I could stop it. Hazewood, and good hazewood at that. The kind of stock a guildman would have quietly pocketed and logged. Cut only days ago, still green at the break, which meant it grew somewhere close. The man banged the door with the flat of his hand. "Chief, I brought an alchemist." A pause. "Well, no, I didn't check his papers, but he looks the part." The chief was an old man with a careful, worn face, and he came forward already apologizing for the welcome. I took out my medallion and let him see it. Master rank, the top of the guild's grades, the one every alchemist learns to know on sight. His eyebrows climbed. "That mark. You're a master, and the highest grade, no less." He dipped his head. "Forgive Zeke his manners. We've had reason of late to be wary of strangers. I'm the chief here. Sit, please. Let me pour you something before I start begging." So, the blunt man had a name. Zeke leaned back against the wall by the door, arms folded, watching me like I might turn to smoke. The chief poured the tea himself, with hands that weren't quite steady, and set a cup in front of me. For a moment, we only drank, the way people do when the real thing is hard to begin. Then, he put his cup down. "I'll be plain, Master Rust." He folded his hands on the table. "You wouldn't happen to be carrying any old-type magic crystals, would you? Old-type, not crystals. Old-type crystals. A man doesn't ask for the discontinued model of a thing unless the new model has already failed him, and failed him badly." "I don't have any on me," I said. "Tell me why a village needs old crystals so badly it stops a stranger in the street for them." The chief looked at Zeke, and Zeke pushed off the wall, and between the two of them, the whole rotten thing came out. "A year back," the chief said, "during the war, the guild reformed our weapons." Reformed. He said the word the way you'd hold something spoiled at arm's length. Out here, every village lives and dies by its magic guns. They're the one thing that keeps the beasts off the wall on a bad night. And for as long as I've been chief, that meant the Iron Hand. Zeke went out the back and came in again with 2 long guns, one in each hand, and laid them on the table in front of me like evidence at a trial. I knew the first one before it touched the wood. The Iron Hand. Sturdy, plain, a little ugly, built heavy in the places that needed to be heavy and nowhere else. I had helped build it. Years ago, back when the man who trained me still ran the forging side, Hammond, I had worked the crystal end of that exact design. Hammond used to say a frontier gun had only one job, to fire the 10,000th time as well as the first in a cold soldier's hands on the worst night of his life. We had built the Iron Hand around that single sentence. I nearly said so out loud, nearly told them which department had once made the very crystals they were dying without. I swallowed it. I turned the gun over once, felt the old balance of it come back into my hands, and set it down. "The Iron Hand was a true friend to us out here," the chief said. Then he nodded at the second gun, and his mouth went thin. "That one, the Kingfire, if we're being polite about it, worse than useless." The Kingfire was the prettier of the two, slimmer, newer, more raw power packed into it on paper, and it was junk. I didn't need the chief to tell me. I could read it off the thing where it lay, but he told me anyway, and I could have recited it with him. Fragile where the Iron Hand was solid. A firing crystal that misfired near as often as it fired, and a misfire on the wall at night is a dead man. Greedy, worst of all. It drank through crystals so fast a village could barely keep it fed, and the new crystals cost more than most families out here cleared in a whole season. "So keep the Iron Hands," I said, though I already felt where this was going. Zeke let out a short, ugly laugh. "That's the swindle of it. We can't." The chief explained it the way a man explains a wound he's stopped expecting to heal. When the guild rolled out the Kingfire, they hadn't merely offered it alongside the old model. They had discontinued the Iron Hand outright, and, quiet as a knife, they had stopped making the old type crystals the Iron Hand ran on. Not because the old crystals were poor. The old crystals were fine. The old crystals were better. They stopped them because a gun nobody can feed is a gun nobody can use. Kill the crystal, and you kill every Iron Hand on the frontier overnight, no matter how well the gun itself still shoots. After that, a village had exactly one thing left it was allowed to buy, and the guild owned that one thing, top to bottom. "Reform," Zeke spat. "It's a swindle, plain. The old power was more than enough. There was nothing wrong with what we had. They broke it on purpose so we'd have to buy the new, and the new one gets folk killed." His voice climbed. "Attacks are up. The wall doesn't hold the way it did. 3 houses on the east row went dark in one night this spring, and the ones inside them didn't leave on a cart. So people pack up and run while they still can. And every family that runs, the next attack's a little worse for whoever's fool enough to stay." I knew the trick from the inside without ever having sat in the room where they chose it. It had the fingerprints of every meeting I'd been dragged to and ignored in. The same men who'd measured my whole department by what it billed and nothing by what it held up. A reliable gun that lasted a lifetime made the guild one sale. A fragile one that misfired and starved made it a sale every season, forever. From behind a polished desk, that was not a scandal. That was good arithmetic. Nobody in that building would ever have to stand on this wall and find out what the arithmetic cost. He cursed the guild then, low and thorough, and he was right to, and he had no idea he was cursing it to one of its own. I sat there holding a stranger's tea and understood the whole shape of it all at once, from the wrong side. The old crystals this village was bleeding out for, the plain, unglamorous, load-bearing thing nobody upstairs had ever wanted to pay for, that was my work. The exact work they used to call menial, the gopher's work. Out here, it was the line between a village and an empty street with a child's shoe in the doorway. I should have felt vindicated. Mostly, I felt tired. And then, underneath the tired, something that was almost anger, kept low and clear, and pointed north at a polished desk, a whole kingdom behind me. Chief, I set the cup down. You asked if I had old crystals. I don't. I watched the last of the hope drain out of his face, and then I handed it back. But I can make them. The room went very still. Even the fire seemed to hold. The chief started and started again. They're discontinued. The guild itself stopped. I know precisely who stopped making them and exactly why. I let that sit without explaining it. The old crystals aren't gone because they're impossible. They're gone because someone decided they weren't worth the margin. That is a very different thing from can't. I can make Iron Hand crystals, the real ones, as fast as your guns can burn them. Zeke came off the wall entirely. You're saying it straight? No catch? No fee? We can't meet? No catch. I glanced at the door, at the pale branch I'd seen fixed over it on the way in. I'll need one thing from you first, that branch. The pale wood over your door. Where does it grow? The chief blinked, thrown clean off his grief. The hazewood? All through the hollows north of the village. It's a weed, Master Rust. We can't be rid of the stuff. Good for nothing but firewood, and it burns poorly at that. Why would? Because that's what I make them out of. Not the whole truth. Enough of it. Take me out to it come morning, and I'll show you a thing the guild looked at and decided wasn't worth the doing. The two of them looked at each other across the lamplight, and a thing came back into that little room that I don't think had been inside it in a year. It wasn't quite belief yet. It was near enough to hope that the difference didn't matter tonight. Outside, the last of the light was going off the broken wall. For the first time since I'd slid my resignation across a bureaucrat's desk and ridden out into the dark, I was standing exactly where my work meant something. And the two men across the table from me had no idea that the guild they hated and the gopher they were begging for help were the very same story, only told from its two far ends. I let them keep the night. The proving could wait for the light. Morning came gray over Tolby, and I was up before the light finished. I had promised these people a proving at a dark table the night before, and I meant to keep it while the whole street could watch. The chief was already at his door, hands folded, working himself up to a question he clearly found awkward. He got there eventually. Before I showed them anything, he said he had to settle what I would take for it. Coin they had little of, but whatever the village could spare was mine to name. I named it. The hazewood, I said. The tree materials, the fallen branches, the fruit, as much of it as you can spare. That's my payment, all of it. He looked at me the way a man looks at a stranger who has just asked to be paid in dirt. That's all you want? The chief turned his head, as if the hills behind his house might explain me. There's hazewood all over these slopes, true enough, but what earthly use is it? It won't even hold a flame worth the name. Zeke had come up behind him, thick through the shoulders, still half suspicious of me in daylight the way he'd been in the dark. He said what the chief was too polite to. It was firewood that wouldn't burn. It was weed. Nobody had cut it for anything but the sprig over the door in longer than he'd been alive. Then you lose nothing by giving it to me, I said. Take me up to where it grows. I'll show you the rest. The chief studied me another moment, then gave it up and decided to trust the medallion over his own good sense. He called for anyone with legs to come along. Word had already moved in the night. The traveling alchemist, the old crystals, the mad promise. And by the time we started up the northern slope, there was a straggling line of villagers behind us, curious, quiet, keeping their hope small so it wouldn't hurt if it broke. I noticed there were almost no children in that line. A village keeps its children close to the road where it's safe. Tolby had no such place left. I filed that away and kept climbing. The grove sat in a fold of the hills, and the sun found it just as we did. Pale-barked trees, dark leaves, fruit gone soft on the ground where nobody had ever thought it worth bending for. The chief waved his people forward and told them to gather branches and fruit for the alchemist, the way you'd order men to shovel a ditch. They'd barely started a pile when I stopped them. That's enough, I said. Zeke echoed it louder, hands off. That's plenty. And the villagers straightened, confused. One fruit was all I picked up. pale, heavy, unremarkable. I turned it over in my fingers and let them all get a good look at how small it was. "You know what a magic crystal is made from," I told the crowd. "A monster's core. That's the only way you've ever seen it done, and it's the only way the guilds will tell you it can be done." I closed my hand around the fruit. But it isn't the only way, not even close. Then I opened my pack and drew 3 scrolls, and I set all 3 moving at once. I heard the sound the villagers made before I saw a single face. A few of them knew what a scroll was, the secret art an alchemist pours his whole life into learning. And those few made the loudest noise, because they understood that 3 at once wasn't a trick. It was a thing they'd been told a man simply could not do. The first scroll was purification. It is the plain heart of everything I know, and it did the plainest, strangest thing. It reached into the empty air over the grove. Nothing there, just morning and cold, and it began pulling the mana out of it. You could see it come. A haze gathered where there had been clear light, thin at first, then thicker, then a hanging cloud of it, black as spilled ink turned to smoke, hovering an arm's length off the ground with nothing holding it up. Someone whispered that it was God's work. I didn't correct them. It was only research nobody had bothered to fund, but this was not the morning to say so. I lifted the hazewood fruit and pushed it up into the black haze. The fruit drank. That's the only word for it. That endless appetite the tree is built around and nobody ever used. It woke, and the haze poured into that one small fruit and vanished. The pale skin going dark, then darker, until the thing in my hand was black through and heavy with more mana than it had any business holding. The crowd had gone from noise to a held breath. The second scroll was already turning. Grind. It spun the air into a small, tight tornado, a hand's-width whirl of glittering wind standing on the grass, and I dropped the blackened fruit straight into the middle of it. "Look, the little whirl of wind," someone breathed. "That's a tornado," said another, as if naming it made it less impossible. It did not make it less impossible. Round and round it went. The fruit caught in the center of it, and I felt the old quiet settle over me. The one that used to come in a lab nobody visited. The work happening under my hands exactly as it should. I let the third scroll open, polishing. This one laced the tornado with diamond dust, a shimmer inside the spin that I could thicken or thin by will, and it began to cut. A crystal has 3 things that matter: how big it is, how much it pours out, how much it holds. And the pouring is decided right here in the cut. I worked it slow. Cut it too fine, and you make something pretty and half dead. I've seen men do exactly that and call it progress. I brought the fruit down into a stone with more faces than I bothered to count, black haze still turning inside it. And then I stilled the wind and sealed the mana in with a fixation scroll so none of it could ever leak back out. I held it up. A finished magic crystal, made from a weed and a fistful of morning air. "So beautiful," a woman said, and she wasn't wrong, but that wasn't the point yet. I crossed to the chief and set it in his palm. "Go on," I said. "Try it in that old iron hand gun of yours." His hands shook. He had a right to shake. A year of this village dying around an empty weapon, and here was the thing it ran on, made in front of him out of trash. He loaded the crystal into the old gun, the sturdy plain one built to fire the 10,000th time as well as the first, and he pointed it at the open sky, and he pulled. A black beam went up out of Tolby and split the morning. For a breath, nobody moved. Then the chief said it fired. He said it out loud twice, like he couldn't trust it once, and the grove came apart at the seams. They were shouting. A few of them were crying and pretending they weren't. "It's a real crystal," someone kept saying, over and over. "We don't have to live in fear anymore." I stood there and let it land on me. The one thing the guild never once let me have. The work had mattered, and the people it mattered to were standing right in front of me, making noise about it. I let them have the shouting. Then I got back to work, because one crystal keeps one gun fed for a season, and this village needed more than a season. I laid my scrolls out on the grass. Not 3 this time, 10. 2 more full sets of the 3, and 1 release scroll besides. And I set my hands to 3 hazewood fruits at once. The cheering stopped. I want to be fair to them. They weren't ungrateful. They had simply reached the edge of what they could clap for. 1 crystal from the air was a miracle they could hold in their heads. 3 growing at once under one man's hands. 3 black hazes and 3 tornadoes turning side by side while I moved between them without hurrying was something else. They went quiet and they stared, and a little of the joy in their faces curdled into something they didn't have a word for. I've seen that look before. It's the look people give a thing they've decided they need too much. It took close to an hour. When I finished, there was a pile of finished crystals on the grass of the useless grove, standing about as tall as a child, each one black-hearted and heavy, and I turned to the chief. "It's done," I said. "Take them, all of them. They're rich, richer than the old stock ever was. Each of these holds about twice the mana of the ones you used to buy. They'll last you twice as long, maybe better." "Twice?" The chief's mouth worked. He looked at the pile, then at me, then back at the pile. "Twice as much. And this many. Master Rust, we can't burn through this in one village if we tried. I'll have to speak to the Lord about it. I don't have the standing to hold this much on my own. That was exactly what I'd hoped he'd say, though I kept it off my face. Zeke already had a cart coming up the slope. He got the villagers moving, loading the crystals with the careful hands of men handling their own survival, and he barked at the ones who kept stopping to gawk. Your hands have stopped, all of you. Move. The chief offered to help me haul the leftover materials back down to the village himself, which was kind, and I turned him down, which felt unkind until I showed him why. I set the grind scroll and the release scroll going together over the rest of the grove's fallen wood and fruit. The whole scattered mess of it lifted into one long dust devil, spun up off the ground, and I drew it down into my pack in a single breath. A grove's worth of material swallowed into a bag that didn't so much as bulge. The villagers made their last sound of the morning at that. One of them wanted to know how much that pack could possibly hold. I didn't tell him. Chief, I said, low, while the carts filled behind us. There's a matter I'd like to discuss, somewhere quieter than a hillside. He took my meaning before I'd finished the sentence. Quick, for a tired old man. He handed the last of it to Zeke and led me back down toward his house, and I was glad of him. I'd have hated to spell it out in front of 30 pairs of ears. Over tea, the old man tried to thank me and couldn't get the size of it into words. He kept starting and stopping. When he said the crystals I'd made would last them decades, not years, decades, he'd done the arithmetic himself on the walk down. His voice went thin. Ease up, I told him. This was never about one bad winter. Think further out. For one village, what's in that cart will outlast you and me both. He begged me to stay. Stay a week, stay the season, stay and let them thank me properly. I told him the truth, or enough of it. I was bound north, to a knight named Karan, opening new land at the edge of the frontier, and I'd given my word I'd help her carve it out of nothing. The name lit him up. He'd heard the Lord speak of her, half the frontier had. He started in on the rumors, the strength of her, the men she'd sent flying, the fearsome thing they called her, and I let him run. And I quietly steered him past the ugliest of the nicknames, because she was a friend, and she wasn't there to laugh it off herself. Then I put the real thing on the table. There's something you can do for me in return for nothing, I said. When you speak to your lord about the surplus, raise a trade. Old-type crystals, moving quietly between his lands and Karin's new territory. Every village out here needs them. If the two of them build the road for it now, nobody on this frontier ever goes back to being fed one bad crystal at a time. He agreed before I'd finished pouring. He'd have agreed to nearly anything I asked that afternoon, but this one he understood in his bones. A supply line the frontier could hold in its own two hands. One more thing, I set my cup down. I'd like to send a letter, pen and paper, if you have them. He found them. And while he fussed with the tea, I wrote to Harold. Harold and I went back to the academy, the three of us, him, me, and Karen. And he'd gone into the army, good with a ledger and better with a blade. And he was the one man I trusted to tell me the truth about what the capital was doing. Because sitting in that grove, I'd started counting backward. The reform that killed the Iron Hand, the new guns the army had switched to during the war, the fragile, expensive ones, the old crystal rights, quietly bought up and shelved. It all pointed one direction, and it had a familiar smell to it. The smell of a certain preening rival of mine, with his fingers in exactly the kind of pie that ruins a frontier without him ever seeing the frontier. I didn't write his name. I wrote to Harold to keep his eyes on the capital and tell me what the army did next, and I sealed it with my own master's medallion so he'd know at a glance it was serious. I handed it to the chief to send on. He turned it over, saw the seal pressed into the wax, and held it a little more carefully. He asked me, one last time, to stay the night. I didn't. I'd made this village's proving, and it was already loaded onto carts. The rest of my road was still ahead of me. I collected my pack, heavy now with a grove I hadn't paid a copper for, and I stepped back out into the afternoon and turned north, toward Korean, toward the frontier, toward whatever the guild I'd walked out of was busy digging for itself while its rival smiled, and no one at a polished desk suspected the gopher had already started building the thing that would bury them. 3 days north of Tolby, the good land gave out. The grass thinned to gray scrub, then to nothing, and by midday, I was riding across cracked ground where the only green things had teeth. Karen's letter had called this stretch the wasteland, and I had thought that was a figure of speech. It wasn't. Out here, almost nothing living was ordinary. Almost everything was a monster, and every monster came at you on sight. Ippo carried me steady through it, 8 legs finding the ground the way they always did, his broad back rocking under me like a boat. He had crossed worse. When something shifted in the scrub off to our left, he felt it before I did. A shape came out of the dust, low and fast, a snake made of shadow and vine, striking for his forelegs. He didn't so much as break stride. One of those legs came down, and the thing stopped being a threat in a single wet crunch. I dropped down, pulled on a glove, and bagged the body in a waterproof sack. Its skin was slick and cold, no use fresh, but a shadow vine's core rendered down into a fine reagent. And out here, a man took his materials where he found them. Nobody was going to fund the trip for me. Back in the saddle, I checked the map against the horizon. A water source was marked ahead, and past the water, Karin's camp. After weeks on the road, that word, camp, had started to sound like the end of something. I turned Ippo toward the pond and let myself want it a little. The pond was the size of a village well yard, brown and still, and I was curious what lived in it. Out here, that curiosity was a bad habit I had never managed to break. Hippo snorted a warning. I tilted my head on instinct, and a white shape burst up out of the water and shot past where my skull had been. It landed hard on the mud and rolled. A lizard, small enough to cup in 2 hands, round-bodied, with a stub of a snout and eyes far too big for it. It looked honestly like something a child would draw and call a dragon. It looked barely old enough to be anything. Hippo grunted again. I dropped into a crouch, and that was the only reason the tentacle missed me. It came out of the pond thick as my arm, whipped past my ear, and closed around the little lizard instead. The water heaved. Something down there had been waiting, and it hauled the creature back toward the surface, dragging it through the mud in a spray of purple. The lizard's legs scrabbled at nothing, and then it stopped fighting the pull and turned its head, and those oversized eyes found me, just me, held on me like a hook. I knew what I was looking at, a monster. Out here, monsters eat monsters, and that is simply the way of the world. I had watched Ippo make a meal of the natural order twice already that morning and hadn't blinked. No matter how much it looked like a child, it was plainly a beast, and the sensible thing, the correct thing, was to ride on and let the pond keep what the pond had caught. The eyes didn't let go. I have never been good at the correct thing when something is asking me not to walk away. Ippo, do it, I said. He was already moving. He drove down through the shallows, and his weight came down on the tentacle, and it parted, and a gout of purple sprayed across the mud. Whatever owned it recoiled under the water and did not come back for seconds. The lizard lay where it fell, the severed length still cinched around its middle, not moving. I carried it up onto dry ground and pulled on the purified gloves. The purple fluid beaded off them and ran clear away. I noted that and didn't like it. It was the same venom I'd scraped off worse things than pond beasts. I unwound the coils, bagged them as material out of habit, and unrolled a reading scroll across the little body. The scroll told me almost nothing I could use. Its life had sunk far down toward nothing, that much was plain, but it had fallen from a ceiling so high the human scale ran out before it did. I read it twice. By any measure, I knew this small drowned thing should not have been able to hold that much. I couldn't tune a proper potion for something I couldn't name, so I didn't try. I set Ippo to watch the water and brewed the safe thing instead. A few herbs, a shaving of hazewood from my pack, a measure of the pond water purified clean, and eased it past the lizard's teeth. Behind me, the pond stirred again. Fresh tentacles broke the surface, and Hippo stamped them flat and dragged the ugly catfish thing that grew them up onto the bank, dead. The potion took. The reading steadied to something like normal, but the eyes stayed shut, and the creature did not wake. I sat back on my heels, out of ideas and short on time, and told myself the honest thing, that it was a wild monster, that the wasteland killed its own by the hour, that I could not carry every dying thing I found. I was most of the way to leaving it there. Then Ippo lowered his great head and, very gently, nudged the lizard with the flat of his chin. Ippo bristles at monsters. He can smell hostility across a field. It is the whole reason we were both still alive. He had killed 2 things at this pond without slowing down, and he was standing over this one like it belonged to him. That decided it more than the eyes had. All right, I said, and gathered the little body up against my chest. Let's bring the small one along. I mounted with it tucked in one arm. Ippo gave a pleased sort of snort and turned us north on his own, toward the water's outflow. We were close now. I could feel it. I followed the river out of the pond and picked up a path. Not a game trail, a made one. Boots and cartwheels pressed into the dirt. The first honest sign of people I'd seen in days. It ran along the water toward a smudge of smoke, and under the smoke, tents. Rows of them, laid out square and disciplined against the wild. Karin's camp. After all the miles, it was just there, ordinary and real. Hippo slowed without being asked and halted a good stone's throw from the first tent. A low rumble in his chest. I trusted that rumble. I swung down, settled the sleeping lizard into the saddlebag out of sight, and raised the medallion on its cord where it could be seen. My name is Rust, I called toward the empty ground ahead. I hold master rank as an alchemist, trained among the Foundation Seekers, those who chase the truth from first principles. The knight Karin invited me to this land. I requested request an audience. The empty ground answered. 2 figures rose straight up out of it, out of a scrub-covered dip and a shadow I would have sworn held nothing, each with a spear already level. Sisters, near enough in build to be twins, each with a strip of gray cloth bound over the lower half of her face. One cloth was marked with a red eye, the other a blue one, and the spear beneath it glittered with a fine skin of mana. The red-marked one inclined her head, easy and courteous. "Master Rust, be welcome," she said. "Forgive the rough greeting. Out here we've learned that some monsters wear a human shape." I opened my mouth to answer, and her sister's spear moved, not to me, past me, to the saddlebag. "That thing on the mount," the blue-marked one didn't blink. "Isn't that a monster?" She had never seen it. It was asleep, out of sight, wrapped in a bag on the far side of an animal she'd have to get through me and Ippo to reach. And she knew exactly what was in there, the size of it, the shape of it. I filed that away. Neither of these two was only carrying a spear. "Nora," the elder sister's voice didn't rise, but the younger one's spear stopped as if it had hit a wall. "Stand down. We couldn't take Master Rust if we tried. Never mind his mount." For a moment, the spear held. Then the girl called Nora let the point drift down toward the dirt. "Understood, sister," she said, and to me, stiff and low. "My apologies." The elder lowered her own weapon and bowed a little from the neck. "My sister forgot herself. I'm sorry. I'm Arya. This is Nora. There's nothing to apologize for," I said. "You're right to watch a stranger, and you're right that it's a monster." I laid 2 fingers on the medallion. "It's mine, and I'll answer for it, on my rank. If it so much as bears a tooth in your camp, that's on me." Arya studied me a breath longer than the words needed. Then something in her shoulders let go, and she stepped back and swept a hand toward the tents. "Then come in, Master Rust. You're expected." They walked me in through the camp, and I looked at everything. It was a clean operation. Tents in true rows, a broad water jar at the center, humming faintly with a purification charm. The ground swept and ordered. The people I passed had the look of old soldiers, quick eyes that found me, weighed me, and went back to their work in the same motion. Nora brought me to a tent twice the size of the rest. I tapped Ippo's neck and left him waiting outside. Inside, a communication device the width of 3 men filled half the space, and staff moved around it with armloads of scrolls. I was still taking the measure of it when a voice hit me from behind it like a thrown boot. "Rust, you came!" She came around the device at a near run, and then a hand caught mine and crushed it, and I was looking down at Karen. Short. She'd always been short. It had always annoyed her, with her hair cropped and fire red, and a grip that told my knuckles exactly how much of the old strength she'd kept. The Black Bull of War, the Frontier called her now, and I could feel the war in her handshake. But the face grinning up at me was the same one that had force-fed me at 3 in the morning over a workbench when I'd forgotten to eat for a day and a half. Older. Still hers. "You look terrible," she said, delighted. "The road put years on you. Did my guards give you a hard time?" "Your guards," I said, rose out of the dirt with 2 spears and nearly ran my lizard through. She laughed, entirely unrepentant. "Good, then they did it right." She saw my face and spread her hands. "Oh, don't." I put them up to it. "Cold welcome. Spears out. See how the stranger handles himself. You learn more about a man in the 10 seconds after a spear comes up than in 10 years of letters." I knew the trick. She'd been running it since the academy. Throw 2 people into one sharp moment and let the moment forge whatever it forged. It was exactly the sort of thing she'd do to the people she meant to keep. "You could have just asked how I was," I said. "Where's the fun in that?" She turned and lifted the communication device off its stand with one hand, a thing 4 men would have strained at, swung it aside to clear the floor, and set it down without a grunt. Over her shoulder, she called the rest of the staff out for a rest. They went. When the canvas fell behind them, only Arya and Nora were left, standing quiet at the wall. "Tea," Karen said to them, and dropped into a camp chair, and the grin went somewhere else. What replaced it was the reason I'd ridden through a wasteland. "I didn't call you north to pull mana out of my fields, Rust. Though I'll want that too." She looked at me straight. "There's a sickness in this camp. It spreads. My healers can name every fever a soldier catches, and they can't name this one. Can't slow it. Can't say where it comes from. It's endemic now. It lives here. I need Master Rust to treat it, and I need him to find out what it is." I let out a slow breath. I had, God help me, been hoping for a quiet pioneer's life. Fields and crystals, and no one dying. "Is it really trouble?" I said. I was rather looking forward to boring. That brought a flash of the grin back. Trouble found the one man who was ever glad to see it. "What did the professors call you? The professor's nightmare? The problem no one else could crack that wouldn't leave a hard question alone?" She leaned forward, and the teasing thinned out until only the trust was left under it. I didn't send for a healer, Rust. I sent for you, because whatever this is, it's beyond ordinary, and you were never ordinary a day in your life. Behind me, a kettle started to sing, and Arya set out cups without a word. Outside, Ippo shifted his weight, and the whole camp settled into its evening. In the guild, I had made 1,000 bottles a day, and not one of them had carried my name. Here, a lord had crossed a wasteland's worth of danger to put her people's lives in my hands and call me by it, twice. The little lizard was asleep in a saddlebag 10 feet away. Two outcast sisters with impossible eyes stood at the wall. A friend was holding out a cup of tea and an impossible problem in the same gesture. It wasn't home yet, but for the first time since I'd walked out of that polished office, it had the shape of one. All right, I said, and took the cup. Tell me who got sick first. The first thing I did on the frontier was grow myself a workshop. Karen had given me the second largest tent in the camp, hers the only one bigger. On the frontier, a tent was a message, and that one told every soldier in the rows outside exactly how much she expected of me. I set the little white lizard down on a cushion, still asleep, still not waking, and asked Ippo to watch it a moment while I worked. Then, I sent him back into his scroll and opened another. Rose, I said, unrolling it across the purified rug. Time to earn your keep. The scroll bloomed. Out of it uncurled a rose bush the size of a cart, one wide blossom nodding at its crown, vines sliding over the floor like slow green rope. I'd made rose in my student years for the long field trips, a plant that built you a home wherever you dropped your pack. It swayed its bloom at me, which was the closest it came to answering, and got to work. The vines wove first for the little one. Rose bent a deep basket bed out of green cord, soft-walled and shaded, and I lifted the sleeping lizard into it. Then it built the rest: a bed frame, a desk, a chair, a long, flat work table, exactly the height I liked, growing up out of the floor rib by rib, while I laid a mattress and cloth over the frames. Half a lifetime ago, Karen and the others used to crowd into a tent like this one to steal my tea while I worked. I found I was smiling at nothing. Then a voice came from beyond the flap, careful and polite. Master Rust, we've brought you a patient with the sickness. May we come in? I looked at the bench under my hands, the tools laid out in their old order, everything where it should be for the first time in weeks. Bring them in, I said. I'm ready. They came in a line that lasted half a day, and half a day was all it took. Arya and Nora carried them in and out, one after another, the sick of the whole camp. Deep lethargy, heavy limbs, and in the worst of them, fingers and feet gone numb and still. I read each body with a scroll, then mixed the potion to fit it, tuned to that one person and no other. When the mix was right, it glowed a soft gold in the glass. When it was gold, I handed it over. That was the whole trick, and it was no trick at all. Anyone with my training could have done it. What I'd never had, in all those years bottling water for a guild that measured me by the crate, was a bench of my own and my own tools in reach. Give a man his tools, and the work stops being slow. The last patient was an older man whose right hand had hung dead at his wrist for a week. He drank, and we waited, and then his fingers curled. He stared at them. He opened and closed them, once, twice, as if he didn't trust the sight. It moves, he said, and his voice cracked in the middle of it. My hand, it moves. Thank you, thank you. He wouldn't let go of my sleeve for a moment, the cured hand gripping to prove to itself it could. I told him the after effects should be light, since we'd caught him in time, and that if anything went numb again, he was to come straight to me. He nodded like I'd handed him something worth more than the cure, and let Arya walk him out. The sisters were swaying on their feet by then. I'd made 2 more potions before any of them arrived that morning, and I set them on the bench. For the 2 of you, I said. You've been on your feet since dawn. Drink. Arya took hers with a small bow. Nora looked at the glass like it might bite. It's my job, she said. It's a gift, I answered. Different thing. She held it a moment longer. Then, so quiet I nearly missed it. Thank you, and drank. I stepped out into the dark to clear my head, and the camp had changed while I worked. People were still up, mending gear and banking fires, and they looked at me now. 2 mornings ago, they had watched me the way soldiers watch a stranger, weighing whether I was worth the ground I stood on. Now, a woman raised a hand in a small wave. A man I'd cured that afternoon called a good evening across the lane and meant it. One of them touched my sleeve as I passed and just said my name, warm, like it was worth saying. I had spent years handing the guild the water their whole trade ran on, and the most I ever got for it was a shrug and a lower line on the budget sheet. No one there had ever looked up when I passed. The work went out the door in crates with someone else's stamp on it, and that was the end of it. Day after day, until I'd stopped expecting anything else and called the not expecting peace. Here, I had worked one day, and strangers were glad I existed. I stood in the lantern light and let myself feel it, the whole plain weight of it, longer than I usually let anything sit. A man across the way was showing another man his hand, opening and closing the fingers that had been dead that morning, and both of them kept glancing back toward my tent while they talked. I had gone a long time without this. I hadn't known, until it was in front of me, how much of it I'd taught myself to do without. Boots came down the lane at a stride I knew. Karen. There you are. She looked me over and laughed. You look half dead. My healers couldn't slow this thing in 3 weeks. How far did you get? All of them, I said. It's done. She stopped walking. All of them. As in the camp is clear. Half a day. Half a day. She dragged a hand down her face. You're out of your mind. You know that? You saved my people. And I mean that, but you're out of your mind. Then my stomach growled, loud, and she barked a laugh at the sky. A master rank alchemist still living on grass bricks. Sit down. I'm feeding you before you fall over, and then you're going to tell me what did this to us. Finding the cause was the harder half, and I started at the food. The sisters were waiting outside my tent again when I came out, sent by Kari a second morning to keep me company and show me the ground. I called Hippo up from his scroll, and both of them leaned in to watch him unfold, open interest breaking through Nora's guard for half a breath before she caught it. Take me to wherever the food is kept, I said, and Arya led us down. The storehouse was half sunk into the earth, a monster's old den dug out and put to use, because building stone was scarce out here, and a hollow in the ground kept better than a shed. I swung my dowsing pendulum over the stores and read it with a scroll. The mana lay thick down there, thick enough to kill spoilage and keep the meat sound, but thick was normal for a place like this. No anomaly, nothing wrong. This was a den first, I said, half to myself. What lived here? Nora had crouched with both palms flat to the floor, the way she did, listening at things the rest of us couldn't hear. A bear, she said. Before I could chase that, Boots came pounding down the ramp. A broad man in his prime seized my hand in both of his and pumped it. You're Master Rust. You saved my little brother, sir. His arms went dead. He was so far gone, and now he's up walking. Reed, they called him, the man who ran the stores. He swept an arm at the shelves. Anything you need in here, you take it. Anything at all. I thanked him and searched. The food was clean, every crate of it, correctly cured and kept. Whatever was poisoning this camp, it wasn't in here. By noon, I'd read the camp's great water cistern too, and its purification held perfect. Clean drinking water, clean food. I was running out of places to look. Arya set a plate in front of me and would not move until I picked it up. At least eat while you read, Master Rust. She said it gently, but she'd planned it herself. Karen's orders. She said if we let you skip meals, she'd have our heads. That sounded exactly like Karen, the same stubborn care she'd hounded me with since the academy. Some people you don't get to argue with. I ate. 3 plates came from the cook tent, 1 each. I fed Hippo his pellets, cut with the exact measure of crushed magic stone he needed, no more, since more would poison him. Then I spread the patient records across a scroll and hunted the thing I'd missed, the one thread every sick person shared and every well one didn't. Nora watched me, not resting, and let out a breath. A lot of them live alone, she muttered. I stopped with the food halfway to my mouth. Say that again. The sick ones. Mostly single tents. No family. People with families ate together and washed together at the shared jars. People alone did for themselves, apart from the camp's clean water. I turned my transcription scroll on my own plate, on the plain meal in front of me, and cast. The scroll came back with a mark on it I did not want to see. Both of you, stop eating, I said. Now. Arya's hand froze over her plate. You found it. Poison. A trace. Small enough to build up slow, but poison. And it's from a monster. A neurotoxin. That's the numbness, the dead limbs, all of it. Exactly. I heard my own voice go flat, and I didn't like the reason. Because I knew this venom. Not the general shape of it, the way any alchemist knows a monster toxin. But this one, its exact signature, the way you know a particular hand's writing. I had scraped it off something not many days ago, on the road north. Off a creature that had no business carrying a poison this deliberate. In a pool that had no business having it. And here it was again, 100 miles on, in the washwater of a camp full of people who had never done anything to earn it. A cold thread pulled tight under my ribs. Twice was not luck. Twice was a pattern, and a pattern had a hand behind it somewhere. I put the thought away where I put things that don't fit yet, and kept my face still. I've met this one before, was all I said. Recently. An hour later, I laid the answer on Karin's table, still and dead and dripping. It was a catfish thing the length of my arm, ringed with limp tentacles, the sort that lurks in a slow upstream pool. I set it down and let it speak for itself. This is your sickness, I said. The venom's in its tentacles. It was getting into the water. Karen frowned at it, then at me. Rust, you're certain? The cistern purifies. Even used water should burn monster venom right out of the jugs. The drinking water was never the problem. I turned the scroll for her to read. It was the wash water. People rinsing dishes and clothes straight from the river, untreated, because the purified water's rationed by head. The venom soaks in slow, through the skin, through the mouth, a little at a time. The ones living alone got the worst of it, because no one shared a clean jar with them. Her eyes went to Reed and to the tent manager standing beside him, and the two of them started apologizing over each other at once. Karen lifted a hand and cut it flat. Stop. The ration was my call, not yours. I split the clean water by head and left the rest to fend at the river. That's mine to fix. She looked back at the corpse on her table. And this thing. Where is it now, that it isn't still poisoning us? Dead. I nodded at it. I killed it on my way in, as it happens, Ippo and I, before I ever reached your gate. Pure luck. There's nothing left in that pool. I've checked. Keep people off the raw river a few days to be safe, and it's over. Nora, from the corner, muttered something about a man being that far past normal, just being obnoxious. I chose not to hear it. Karen sat back and studied me, half worn out, half something warmer. Treated every patient overnight, she said. Found the cause. Killed it before you'd even arrived. Your work here has been past anything I imagined. Rust. Truly. She said it plainly. The way you'd hand someone a coin, and it landed heavier than any praise the guild had never given me. One more thing. I met her look. More cases might still surface from what's already in people. Tell everyone, anything changes, they come to me and I'll treat it. And if you want this closed for good, give me the budget and I'll build you more purification jugs. Enough that no one has to touch the raw river again. She could have called it an expense and cut it, the way the men who'd thrown me out cut everything I asked for. Instead, she snorted and reached for her seal. A budget, is it? Fine, build them. A wry grin. Try not to solve the next crisis before I've noticed it's happening. I gathered my scrolls and my dead monster and stepped out into a camp that was mine to keep whole now, a place that wanted the work I did and said so out loud. Not home, not yet, but the first roots of one had gone into the ground, and this time I meant to let them hold. Word came up the trade line about 3 weeks after I rode north, and the first thing it carried was a picture I would have paid money to see. A master rank alchemist on his knees in a sealed room, dragging a suction hose across the floor to mop up slime. The man on his knees was Roderick. The scavenger slime kept in that storage room left a residue behind it, and the residue combusted if no one cleared it. A slow, stinking chore somebody had quietly done for years so that nobody else ever had to think about it. That somebody had worked in my department. When President Voss cut basic research to nothing and struck it off the roster, he did not just cut me loose. He cut loose the people who mopped the floors, sealed the hazards, kept the lamps filled, hauled the waste, all the small invisible work that kept the building from eating itself alive. The work did not leave when they did, only the hands left, and the sealed room held what the guild called a Class 1 hazard, which by their own rules, only a master rank was allowed to touch. So there was Roderick, the man who had called me a gopher to my face on the walk to watch them zero out my budget, was doing the gopher's work himself now, on his knees, gagging on the smell, cursing my name into the walls for having left. He said it was my fault. He said it to no one, over and over. No loyalty, no gratitude, that I had walked out and left the guild to rot. He had the truth backwards and inside out, and could not see it with his own hands buried in the mess. The rot did not come from the man who walked out. It came from the men who decided the man who walked out was worth nothing, and then discovered how much nothing weighed. Then the door banged open and a junior came in at a run. Trent, new, up from the equipment alchemy floor. Too young to have any standing and too frightened not to sprint when a master called. The Weapons Guild's vice chairman had stormed the building, he said, breathless. Stormed straight in and was demanding Roderick by name. Roderick was on his feet before the boy finished the sentence. He peeled off his gloves, dropped the hose, and told Trent to have the next master rank, who wandered back, finish the cleaning. Then he left it half done and went to save face at the front desk. That left the door. The sealed room's field repelled anything larger than a breath of air, and only a master rank medallion switched it off long enough to pass through. Trent had no medallion. He stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, unable to close it, unwilling to touch what was steaming on the floor. And after a while, he gave up and went to wait at the entrance for someone with rank to come along. He left the door standing open. Mana-thick air rolled into a room that had been sealed against exactly that, and down on the floor, the residue Roderick had left half-mopped began to harden, and bead, and, slowly, in the dark, where no one was looking, to twitch. The vice chairman's name was Gordon, and he ran the Weapons Guild's supply, armor and arms, most of it bound for the military, with a war coming that everyone could feel and no one wanted to name out loud. He had come about a delivery that was badly overdue, and he was not a subtle man about anything. That a man like Gordon had had to storm the building in person told its own story. Deliveries had been slipping for weeks. The orders the guild used to fill without a thought were arriving late or not at all, and the clients had started coming to knock the doors down themselves. This was only the loudest of them. An apprentice met him first. Simon, the eldest of Roderick's apprentices, shoved to the front, the way the eldest always is when no one else wants to face the angry client. He tried to explain the delay, a shortfall in materials, nothing they could do at their end. Gordon had no use for an apprentice's explanation. He wanted the master. He wanted Roderick. He got Roderick. What he got was Roderick fresh from the storage room, still soaked through with the reek of it, his own nose long since gone dead to the smell, so that he had no idea he was walking a wall of it into a closed room. The smell arrived a half-second before the man did. Gordon, who spent his days among rough weaponsmiths and believed nothing could turn his stomach, clapped a hand over his face and demanded to know whether he was being mocked. Simon went the color of paper and fixed his eyes on the ceiling, pinching his nose, breathing through his mouth, saying nothing, because there was nothing he could say that would not make the moment worse. Roderick understood at last that the smell was coming off him. Mortified, he turned to go and change, and Gordon, who wanted a delivery date far more than he wanted clean air, planted himself in the door and refused to let him leave without one. So Roderick, cornered, desperate to be out of that room, turned to Simon for backup, and he read the boy's watering eyes and pinched face and upturned chin as a nod, as agreement, as yes, master, we can manage it. And on the strength of a subordinate trying not to be sick, he promised Gordon the whole delivery by tomorrow. Gordon took the word, said he had heard it plainly, warned Roderick not to dare forget it, and fled the room and its stench with what dignity he had left. And Simon stood there and did the arithmetic his master had skipped. Tomorrow was impossible. They could not make what the delivery needed. He said it aloud to the empty room, white to the lips, that they were finished. And he was more right than he knew, because the thing the delivery came down to, the choke point behind every stalled order in the building, was water. And there was exactly one man alive who had ever made it right. Roderick washed, changed, and called every apprentice of the weapon forging division to the lab, even the ones on their rest, cleaned up and settled into a leather chair like a small throne, only a faint sour note left clinging to him. He demanded to know why the military's order was not moving. The order was for fire circuits, small inscribed boards that took raw mana in one end and put fire out the other, the working heart of half the weapons the guild sold. Simon explained the holdup the way you explain anything to a man with a temper, slowly, and with the worst of it wrapped in cotton. The circuits needed master-grade distilled water for the solution they were inscribed in, and again for the wash after, and nobody left in the building could make it. Roderick laughed at that. Distilled water, he said. A first year could make distilled water. It was the most basic thing in the whole craft, beneath a master, beneath even talking about. So Trent brought out a circuit they had made with water they had refined themselves, and set it in the tester, a board slot, a mana crystal handle, a needle that read the output. Roderick worked the handle himself to prove the point. The circuit threw a blade of flame off the end of the bench, and even from his chair he could see what was wrong with it. The flame guttered. It shivered thin and fat and thin again, the mana bleeding rough and uneven through a board that should have burned clean and steady, weak, unstable, a weapon you would not want in your hand when it mattered. One of the apprentices said the quiet thing then, that what they actually needed was Rust's water, that his had been the standard, that his was the one water that ever held clean all the way through the wash, every time, without a thought. The name went off in that room like a struck match. Roderick came up out of the chair and told the man never to say it again. Not that name, not in his lab, not in front of him, not ever. Then he said he would make distilled water finer than that department ever managed, and they would all stand there and watch him do it. He was hours at it. Distilled water had taken me almost no time at all. It was the first thing I made every morning, 1,000 bottles of it before the rest of them were awake, as ordinary to my hands as tying my boots. Roderick stood at that bench, long past the point where his own apprentices stopped daring to watch, and somewhere in the 4th hour, alone with a beaker that would not come clean, a thought reached him that he would sooner have swallowed his own tongue than say aloud that the man he had called a gopher had been carrying a weight Roderick had never once felt the burden of, because Roderick had spent his whole career standing on top of it, that a floor is invisible right up until somebody pulls it out from under you. He crushed the thought flat before it could finish forming. Then he poured out the water he had finally, barely made, and told the room it was better than the old stuff, because the only thing worse worse than a bad result was admitting whose absence had caused it. His water took him several times longer than it ever took me, and it was worse in every way that counted. They ran the circuits on it anyway. Simon read out the measurements and softened them as far as they would stretch. The boards met the standard. They just met it. They passed the way a drowning man passes a swimming test, reaching the far wall with nothing left over. No strength in reserve. One bad moment away from going under. Zero margin on the stability. Zero. I have thought about that number more than once since. They cut my department's budget to zero and called it sound business. And all those years the water I made came out with a margin of safety so wide no one ever saw it, because nothing I made was ever in danger of failing. Take the man away, and the margin walks out the door with him. Zero on the ledger, zero in the circuit. The same number arriving twice, the second time in a weapon meant for a soldier's hands. Roderick looked at a bench full of bare minimum boards bound for a war and ordered them into mass production. Enough for the delivery. Move, move. And the apprentices bent to it and worked deep into the night on water that should never have left the bench. And not one of them said the single word that would have stopped it. Deep in the night, the door melted, not opened, melted. It sagged off its hinges and dropped to the floor with a wet crash, and through the gap came the slimes. The residue Roderick had left half cleaned in a sealed room. The open door a frightened boy could not close. 3 weeks of rich air pouring into a space built to keep it out. All of it had been quietly adding itself up while they argued about water, and now the sum came due all at once. The scavenger slimes had crossed the whole building through that open door, eating as they went, and they poured into the lab in a slow, corrosive tide, dissolving wood and metal wherever they touched. Roderick shouted for someone to shut the door, and there was no door left to shut. The apprentices scattered off their benches. Simon was the one who kept his head. He snatched up a circuit tester, triggered the flame blade off the end of it the way you would draw a sword, and swept it low across the floor. The slimes shrank back from the fire, and that bought the room a little space and a little time. Roderick's one useful instinct that night was to throw himself between the swarm and a plain wooden crate, the crate that held the finished delivery circuits. He waved the apprentices off it, guarding the boards like they were treasure. Then he put his foot down on a slime, and the foot went straight out from under him, and he came down hard in the middle of a cluster of them. They went over him. Scavenger slimes are rarely deadly to a man. They feed on waste and dead matter, not on live flesh. So what happened to Roderick was not a wound. It was worse than a wound for a man like him. They swarmed up over him head to foot before anyone could reach in, and the apprentices had to grab him by both arms and haul him bodily out of the puddle. What came out the other side was Roderick with half his clothes eaten off him, and a stench on him now that made the storage room smell like a spring garden. The man who had refused to let anyone say my name spent the low point of his year being dragged out of a pool of slime by the boys he spent his days terrorizing. Guards came at last and helped finish the swarm off, and the work of it ran clear through to dawn, and one of them, near the end, killed the last slime of the night inside the wooden crate, the delivery crate, the very one Roderick had risked his skin to guard. It had gotten in. It had been in there long enough, in the dark under the lid, to eat through several of the finished circuits before the guard's blade ever found it. No one saw. That is the whole hinge of it. No one saw. Roderick was already gone by then, filthy and humiliated, and wanting nothing in the world but a bath, out the door before the light was full. The apprentices were gray to the bone with exhaustion. The crate sat there looking exactly like a crate, and nobody, in all that long, ruined night, thought to lift the lid. By full daylight, the fight was over, and the delivery still had to go. Gordon had a promise and a war standing behind him, and the circuits, the barely passing zero-margin circuits, some of them now quietly eaten hollow by a slime nobody knew had been in the box, still had to cross the city to the Weapons Guild by the deadline Roderick had invented out of a boy's grimace. The senior apprentices were spent. They had been awake through 2 nights folded into one, the first for the mass production, the second for the swarm, and when the crate finally had to be picked up and carried, they did what tired men in a badly run shop always do. They handed it down to the newest apprentice, Nate, lowest rank, last through the door, the boy who got every job nobody above him would touch. Nobody told him to check the boards. Nobody rechecked them for him. The seniors had passed the circuits the afternoon before, and that had been the last time any eye went over them, before the slime, before the crate sat open all night in a room crawling with the things. Nate took the crate because he was told to take the crate. He said he understood, and he shouldered the guild's word to the military and carried it out the front door and across the waking city. And not one man left in that building suspected that a share of what he carried was already ruined. And that was the crack. That was the whole of it. After all the noise, not a speech, not a reckoning, not one honest soul standing up to say the guild had built its castle on a man it threw away. Just a tired boy with a wooden crate on his shoulder, walking out a door into the morning, carrying the proof of it. For years, the guild had told itself a comfortable story that the man in the back rooms making the water was a convenience, a cost, a line on a sheet you could cross out and never miss. The boards riding out on Nate's shoulder were that story finally coming due. Pull out the plain thing at the bottom, and every fine thing you built on top of it ships out cracked, and you do not even know to go looking. The whole of what they thought of me, wrong, walking down the street in a box. I did not know it that morning, and neither did they, but those boards were bound somewhere worse even than a soldier's wreck. Some of them would misfire in the field, and a few would drift in time into hands that had been patiently gathering exactly this kind of guild-made flaw. Hands I had crossed twice already on the road north and not yet turned to see. But that is the next stretch of the story. That dawn, it was only a crate and a boy and a wrecked open door. The whole of it reached me slowly, the way news reaches the edge of the map, in pieces, up the trade line, a merchant's aside first, and then a fuller account limping in weeks behind the events themselves. By the time it did, I was a very long way from any of it. I had spent those same days growing rows of purification jugs for a camp that thanked me to my face for each one. Sleeping under a tent Rose had woven warm around me, the little white lizard still curled asleep in its basket in the corner, and no nearer to waking than the day I found it. The guild had measured me at nothing and struck me off, and I had gone straight to a place that wanted the work of my hands and said so out loud. By every account, I should have heard the news of their unraveling and felt nothing but level. I did not feel level when it got to me. The zero margin, the ruined crate, the exhausted boy carrying it out the door. The part that stayed and sat in my chest was not the picture of Roderick being dragged out of the slime. Satisfying as I will admit that picture was, it was the soldiers. Somewhere out there were men who would raise a weapon in the one hard moment they needed it and feel it die in their hands because a circuit failed that I would have caught in a single heartbeat if I had still been standing at that bench. My leaving had been right. There was no version of it that was not right, but it had a cost, and the cost was going to be paid, at least in part, by people who had never once done me wrong. I sat with that a good while in the lamplight, with Rose swaying its bloom slow in the corner and the lizard breathing its endless sleep. I could not stand at that bench anymore. They had gone to a great deal of trouble to make sure of it. What I could still do was the thing directly in front of me. Build here and build it right, with every margin left in, so that nothing I ever made went out a door as a danger to the person who trusted it. That was my whole answer, and I decided it that night. Not to ride back, not to gloat, and not to save them. Only to make what I made too good to argue with, in a place that would rather have the work than protect a proud man's pride. The guild was cracking. I understood that now. The way you understand a beam has finally gone somewhere in a house you no longer live in. A single sound, carrying from far off, the first of a great many to come. But what they owed me had not come due. A cracked crate of circuits was not a reckoning, and I was not fool enough to mistake it for one. It was the first hairline showing in the wall, that was all. The price of a zero somebody wrote years ago, only now beginning to add itself up in earnest. There would be more. I turned back to my jugs in the warm tent, and I let it come. Hippo smelled the camp before I did, and all 8 of his legs picked up under me without being asked. 3 days out hunting, and I came back with the budget Karin had signed off on, and a pack full of the reason I'd gone. Reed met me at the storehouse, wiping his hands on his apron, and his face did the thing it always did lately when he saw me, like a debt he still meant to pay. Good timing, I told him. I took a few monsters on the way. Figured the edible parts could go to the stores if you want them. He wanted them. I set the pack down, worked the seam open, and started unloading. 4 twin horn bulls came out first, then the 3-headed hell horses, the mole bears, a rat type as long as a man, and after that, I stopped counting for him and just let the pile grow. The yard went quiet. Reed made a sound that wasn't quite a word. That little pack of yours, he managed, is not little. It's a small expansion. Master Rust, there's a mountain of hell horse on my ground. A big man drifted over from the drill lines. Bald, built like a wall, a veteran of Karin's. He walked the pile slowly, naming beasts under his breath, and stopped at the mole bears with something close to hunger. Special grade those two, he said, half to himself. I'd have paid to go around with them alive. I left the assessment to Reed and stepped back out of it. At the guild, 3 days of work like this earned a line on a ledger and someone else's name on the result. Here a crowd went silent over it, and a man wished he'd been there. I still didn't quite know what to do with the difference. The white lizard was where I'd left it, curled small in the vine basket Rose had woven into the corner, still asleep, still not one bit closer to waking. Rose swayed her bloom at me from beside the basket. I checked the little bottles ranged along the rim and found them emptied exactly on schedule, 1 a day, no more. You kept to the doses, I said, and ran a hand along the nearest vine. Good. Any faster, and the mana would do more harm than the wound did. Too much raw power poisons anything that isn't human. So the healing had to be slow, one careful measure at a time, and all I could do was keep the measures coming and let the thing sleep. It breathed. That was the whole of the good news, and for now, it was enough. Outside, past the tent flap, 2 new water jars had come up from the capital on the sisters' cart, which meant it was time to stop hauling water on this frontier for good. The 2 jars stood taller than Nora, delivered and rinsed and waiting. I dissolved magic stone powder into a measure of ultra-pure water until it ran silver, then went to work with the scrolls. Transfer, release, polish, project, fixation, laying a purifying circuit into the clay 1 line at a time. Nora watched with her hood down and her one blue eye fixed on my hands. When I seeded a crystal into the second jar as its power source, and the clouded water inside went clear on its own, she leaned in so far she nearly went over the rim. "That's incredible," she said. "Can something like that even be done?" "It's the start of it." I capped the jar. "How was the road?" Her report was short, the way everything with Nora was short. The transport went fine, but the capital had a bad mood on it now, tight and watchful, and the price of every common thing had crept up while they were there. They'd already told Karen. I filed it and didn't chase it. Prices climb for 100 reasons, and Karen would be watching the ones that mattered. 2 jars purified on their own behind me, and I was already thinking about the next piece, the one that would mean nobody carried a bucket out here again. Hippo dove the pond first and came up with a mouthful of small fish and no complaint, which meant nothing dangerous had moved into the water since the last thing I'd killed here. Good. The device I meant to leave was too valuable to feed to a monster. I set it at the water's edge and fitted the stone into its heart, a paralyzed cloud's core, the reason I'd ridden all the way to a volcano and cooked in the heat for a week. "Pipes don't last out here," I told Nora, when she asked why I hadn't just run a line. "Monsters chew through them, and we can't afford to ward every length, so we don't move the water. We move a cloud." The stone woke. A pale cloud lifted off the pond, held its shape against the wind, and began to drift toward camp along the path I'd set for it, to fall back into the jars as clean water at the other end. Nora jabbed her spear into the cloud, watched it refuse to scatter, and stared like I'd rearranged the sky. "It reaches all the way to camp," she said flatly. "Moving water like that shouldn't be possible." Then her head turned. Her far sight had caught something long before my eyes could. "Sister Arya's coming!" Arya came at a run down the slope, breathless, one hand raised. "Master Rust, it's from Lady Karen. She wants you back at once." Karen was grinning before I'd cleared the flap, which with her was never a comfort. I told her the jars were finished. She said even a plain purifying jar took an ordinary alchemist days, and mine ran on their own by evening. And what exactly was my trick? I told her the trick was writing the circuit by hand instead of casting it, and she should go look later. Then she slid 2 letters across the table. The first was open, a proposal from the Lord one territory over. His terms were so far in our favor that Karin had already decided it was a trap. "It's not a trap," I said. "He wants old-type crystals for the old iron hand guns." That stopped her. The old crystals had been discontinued years back when the guild pushed everyone onto the new Kingfire guns, which meant nobody made them anymore. Nobody who wasn't me. Her veterans still carried iron hands. She'd never trusted a weapon she couldn't strip in the dark. Half the hard old soldiers on this frontier were the same. "You realize," she said, tapping the letter, "this picks a fight with the powers in the capital." I know. I put the second letter on top of the first, the sealed one, from Herald in accounting, where a man could read a kingdom's health in its books. So I asked someone who'd know how much of a fight. She read it twice. The grin came back, sharper this time, the one she used to wear when we were students planning something we'd get caught for. "The capital's in worse shape than the girls' report said." She folded the letter slow. "That's not a risk, Rust. That's an opening." "Then let's not do it by halves." "Oh, already something beyond belief." She was already reaching for a fresh sheet. "You just make the crystals." The first caravan came into sight a few days later, and I waited for it the way I did most things now, leaned back against Ippo's flank with the sun on my face, while Arya stood watch beside me. It was a long train of mules, baskets heaped with hazewood fruit. The whole trade turned on that fruit. Every part of it, growing, hauling, selling, belonged to somebody else. Only the refining stayed with me, because only I could do it, and that was the whole shape of the deal. Arya's head tilted. "There's one strong one among them," she said, Near the back, I filed that and watched the front. A middle-aged man I knew was leading the lead mule, Zeke, from Tolby, grinning wide when he spotted me. Master Rust, talk to me like you used to, I told him, pushing off Ippo. You've got wounded. Let me see to them. He did. The road out here took its toll, and a couple of mules hadn't made it under the heavy loads. I went down the line with the potions I'd brewed ahead, and beside Zeke, a neat, careful man in a neighboring lord's colors kept a running tally of every basket that came through the gate. Miles, he said, dipping his head. His lordship's clerk. I'll be handling the exchange, with your leave. Then we'll get along fine. I meant it. A man who counted honestly was worth more to a trade than a friendly one. I was halfway down the mules when I found Arya's strong one. She rode at the tail of the caravan in blue priest robes, silver hair loose, sitting her horse like a drawn sword. The last time I'd seen that face, it had been gray with poison and a curse eating across one cheek. The cheek was clean now, whole. Tara had come north. I thanked her first, at the gate, for guarding the villagers on the road. Zeke had told me she'd driven off monsters more times than he could count. Then I brought her into the tent, away from the camp's ears, and Rose poured us rose tea, while Arya's quiet gaze rested on my back through the flap and did not leave. Tara asked me to drop the titles between us. Given what we owed each other, I let her. She'd come for one thing. She set it on the table between the teacups. Just call me Tara, she'd said, and then, plainly, I tracked him to the capital, the one who wiped out my order. I found his hideout, full of these. It was a magic circuit board. My hands knew what they were doing before my head caught up. I pulled on the purification gloves and took a transfer scroll to it, reading the make without touching it bare. I knew this work. I knew it the way you know a hand you've worked beside for years. The forging habits were the alchemy guilds, down to the way the lines were seated. A military spec board, a converter, built to turn raw mana into fire. And that was the first thing that was wrong. A magic gun fires raw mana, I said slowly. Devastating to a monster, to a man, almost nothing. That's why the army calls them safe. I turned the board under the lamp. This changes the mana to fire. Fire does very little to most monsters, but to a man, I didn't finish it. Tara had already gone still across the table. These weren't built to kill monsters. There was no reason to build them if they were. They were built to be aimed at people. That was bad. The next thing was worse, and it came up under my thumb as I read the last of the circuit. A flaw in the seating, a margin that wasn't there at all. If this is ever fired, I said, it won't just work. It'll most likely burst. Take everyone standing near it with it. I set it down very carefully. And it wasn't made that way on purpose. Someone just let a bad one through. I heard my own voice go quiet because the pieces were sliding into each other in the lamplight, and I did not like the shape they made. Tara filled the rest without knowing she was doing it. She described the guild's building in the capital as I'd never seen it. Its walls damaged, its people gray and hollow-eyed, moving like men who hadn't slept in a season. A guild too worn down to check its own work. I'd heard the first cracks of that on the wind weeks ago and told myself it was distant, no longer mine to shore up. Here was where a piece of that house had landed. A guild too broken to catch a defective board. A batch of them shipped out with no one's eyes on it, and a hooded man I'd brushed past twice on the northern road, patient and unseen, gathering exactly that kind of guild-made flaw into his hands and pointing it at people. The men who'd thrown me away and the shadow-hunting Tara's order weren't two problems on two sides of the map. They were one thing feeding itself. The guild's rot was arming the curse user, and the curse user was reaching straight into the guild's rot to be armed. I looked at the small dead board on my table for a long moment and felt the whole board of the world turn quietly over. I didn't say the largest part of it out loud. There was nothing to do with it yet, but carry it. What I said instead was the useful part. Leave the board with me. Don't show it to the guild. They can't be trusted to inspect their own name right now, and I don't want him knowing anyone's reading his tools. Tara had already left the rest of the cash with someone she trusted in the capital and come straight to me. You were the one person I knew would understand these, she said, and there was relief in it, and underneath the relief, a colder resolve. She meant to keep hunting him. I didn't try to talk her out of it. A sword like hers, pointed at a thing like that, was not mine to sheathe. For my part, I did what I always did with a problem too big to solve in a night. I broke it into pieces I could make, more crystals, but some of them turned now to defense, not trade. Harder walls around the water, a hand kept close to the tools that could fight. I told Karen what the board was and what it meant, and watched her go from grinning schemer to old commander in the space of a breath, and knew the frontier would be ready for more than a good market. The dream was taking shape out here. Real jars, real trade, real people who called the camp home and meant it. It was starting to look less like a camp waiting to be abandoned, and more like the shape of a home. I just knew now that someone, somewhere under a hood, was building something too, and that the guild I'd walked away from had handed him the pieces. I set the board on a high shelf where the lamplight couldn't reach it, and I got back to work. I'd waved off Zeke's dinner. There were hills of hazewood fruit stacked across the square, the caravan's whole haul waiting on me, and a buyer who would pay for every crystal I could pull out of it before the mules left in the morning. So I worked. The scrolls glowed under my hands. Fruit went in dull and came out clear, stone after stone, and the finished pile climbed while the raw pile sank. Hours of it. The camp went quiet and then went to sleep around me, and I did not stop. I did not hear Arya until she set a tray down on the crate at my elbow. Master Rust, she nudged it a little closer. I brought food and drink. Won't you take a break? I meant to tell her I was fine. Then the smell of the meat reached me, and I realized I had not eaten since midday. Thanks, I said. I was thirsty, actually. She did not take that for a full answer. Her tent stood a few steps off, and she went and came back with 2 plain wooden chairs, setting them out in the lamplight. Wood is scarce this far north. 2 chairs was a kindness on its own, and she waited, hands folded, until I gave up the work and sat. The ale was better than anything the guild ever poured. I told her so, straight out. It's Reed's own, Arya said, pleased. Brewed from monster barley, his pride, after more failed batches than he'll admit to. The steak was lean twin horn, tender off the knife. We ate without much talk, and the lamp threw its light up across the strip of gray cloth she keeps bound over the lower half of her face, the one marked with a single painted red eye. I had wondered about that cloth since the day I arrived. I did not ask. When the plates were empty, she set hers aside and folded her hands, and her voice changed. There's something I'd like to consult you about. A pause. It concerns me, and my sister. If there's anything I can do to help, I said, just tell me. She asked if I understood what she and Nora were. Ability users, she meant. I thought as much, I said. From that first ambush, the day I rode in, Nora called the little white lizard a monster before she could have seen it. Farsight, or sight straight through solid things. And you read my strength too precisely for a guess. I figured yours was something close to hers. She went very still, and then she told me the whole of it. Nora carried not 1 magic eye, but 2. Clairvoyance and see-through sight, the kind of gift the old stories put on legends. Arya's own was rarer and thinner, a future sight. It reached only a few seconds ahead, and only when a fight was about to break, but it reached. I let out a low breath. Future sight. I had read of it and never once believed I would sit across from it drinking a food manager's ale. That may be bad news for me, I said. Sounds like you can see a man's moves before he makes them. There goes my whole fighting style. She only tilted her head and smiled behind the cloth, and did not tell me whether she had already seen it. That told me plenty. Don't hand that around, I said, quieter. Not the sight, and especially not what sets it off. People who know the trigger know how to blind you. I know. She looked at the lamp. That is why I have never told anyone. But your conduct here earned it, Master Rust. Besides my sister, the people of this camp are the only family Nora and I have. Family. She said the word plainly. The way you set down something heavy, you have carried a long way. I nodded at the cloth over her face. That's a sealing tool, made to hold the eye down. Custom made. Her fingers touched the edge of it. Both of ours, and they are failing. The stronger our eyes grow, the less the seals hold. Some nights, I see things I have no wish to see. I can make you new ones. I heard the caution in it and pushed past it. Better ones. It may take some study, but I can. She slid off the chair and onto her knees in the dirt, head bowed, and started to thank me. Stand up. I said it before she could finish. You said it yourself a minute ago. We're family here. I'll help as family. That's all this is. She rose slowly. I went back to my crystals so she would not have to let me see her eyes above the cloth, and I heard her carry the tray home behind me. I came out into the square, still half asleep, and Zeke was standing in front of the night's work with his mouth open. Where the hills of raw fruit had been, there was a mountain of finished crystal instead, catching the low sun. Every fruit off the caravan, refined. He turned on me like I had done something against nature. You actually turned all of it in one night? He didn't wait for an answer. He spun and started barking at his men. Hey, you lot, load him on the mules, quick, before he changes his mind. The neighbor lord's clerk came over while they worked. Miles kept a tally stick going the whole time, counting every basket through, and even his careful clerk's face had gone loose at the sight of the pile. Produced in a single night, he murmured, mostly to the crystals. My hands are itching for this kind of business. Tara was with him, silver hair loose, watching the loading with the patience of a drawn sword. She caught my eye and dipped her head, and I knew from her stillness she had already decided something. Payment happened in Kargan's tent, over her maps. Miles laid a sheet of gold foil parchment on the table and wrote on it with a mana pen, then pressed his seal into it. The seal took glowed, and faded clear through the paper. A mana-sealed check, he called it. Good as coin anywhere it was shown. I read the figure on it, and then I read it again. It was more than twice the whole year's budget of the department I used to run. The entire yearly allowance of a guild division. The sum I had been told every year was already too generous for the likes of me. Set against one night's work with a mountain of weed fruit nobody else had ever bothered to refine. I stood there and did not quite know what to do with the size of the gap. Karin knew exactly what to do with it. She took the check, glanced at it, and grinned like a card player who has been holding the winning hand all night. Received in full. She snapped her fingers at her buried, ink-stained secretary. Per the contract, pay Master Rust his share. Then, louder, enjoying herself. And I hereby found a Lord Direct Alchemy Research Department in this territory, with Master Rust at its head. Budget drawn from crystal sales, minus his cut. The soldiers in the tent went to a knee, so, a half beat late and feeling foolish, did I. She was not finished. This department would grow, she told me. One day it would stand as its own body, apart from her territory, and I would have to give the thing a name. Anything I liked, so long as it did not sound like the state guild I had walked away from. I said I would think about it. I already knew I would not borrow one syllable from that place. Miles was more than glad to keep handling the crystals for market. He and Karin traded a look over the map that told me they were 3 moves into some scheme I had not been shown yet, and I let them have it. I would rather make the crystals than count them. Karin waved the tent empty. Rust, you stay. Tara caught me at the flat before she went. The curse that had almost killed her was long gone from her face, and she looked at me the way you look at someone before a long road. Congratulations on the appointment. She pressed her palms together, her orders blessing. With what you've told me, I'll pick the curse user's trail up again. I'll ride escort until the caravan's clear of the frontier, then break off north, a parting, for a while. Be well, Rust. Somewhere out there, a hooded man was still moving in the dark, and she meant to walk straight at him with the little I had been able to give her. I did not try to talk her out of it. Her reckoning was hers. May your reckoning be fulfilled, Tara, I said, and meant every word. And then she was gone through the flap into the light. My first act as head of my own department was not weapons or water. It was a pair of eyes. The sisters came to my tent that afternoon. Nora looked around as she stepped in. The vines shifted along the walls at the sound of my voice, and her gaze, blue eye painted on the gray cloth over her face, followed the movement like she was reading the plant down to its roots. She probably was. Rose swayed her one wide bloom at her, unbothered. Which of us first? Arya asked. I held up the thing I had made ready, a small square scroll, palm-sized. Before I touch either seal, I'll wrap this over your eyes. It shuts a magic eye down completely, all the way off, so I can study the cloth tool you wear without your sight fighting me the whole time. I looked between them. We start with Nora. Arya's shoulders tightened. I answered before she could ask. From what you told me, your eye takes the harder toll of the two. Pulling your cloth carries the bigger risk. So, Nora's first. Yours we do slow, another day. Nora only nodded and sat. She helped me set the scroll herself, steady-handed, folding it down over the blue-marked cloth. When it was seated, I spoke the word to wake it. Seal. For a moment, she was quiet. Then, small. I can't see anything. It's completely dark. I had braced for that. I had not braced for what came after. I don't have to see anything, she said. Her voice had gone thin and strange, like a girl setting a great weight down for the first time in her life. So this is how it is, for everyone. A breath. This is how it is, Arya. Think about it. An eye that never closes. Sight that runs through walls and skin and distance whether you want it or not. That shows you the thing behind the thing every waking second, from before you were old enough to ask for it to stop. She had never once, in all her years, known what the dark looked like. And now, for a few borrowed seconds under a paper scroll, she did. And it was not frightening to her. It was rest. 2 tears ran down and darkened the edge of the scroll. Arya was out of her chair before the second one fell. She pulled her sister in and held her, and Nora, who levels a spear at strangers before they finish a sentence, folded into her without a word. I turned my back and gave them the tent's far corner. Some things are not mine to watch. I made myself useful with the thing in my hands instead. The old seal, off Nora's face now, small and worn. I turned it over under the lamp and read how it was built, and the reading told me a story I had not expected. Whoever had made this had not simply muffled the eye by force, the crude way, the choking way. They had tried, with poor tools and clear love, to give the sisters something gentler than that, and had come up just short of it. Someone had cared about these two before the camp ever did, and I was about to throw the work away and replace it with mine. That sat wrong for a moment. That better and kinder are not always the same word, that I might strip out the one comfort in a thing while I was fixing its faults. Then Nora drew a shaking breath behind me, and I let the doubt go. I would keep the care and cut the cruelty. Not a wall clamped over their eyes forever. A switch. On when they wanted the world. Off when they wanted the dark. Their sight, on their command, for the first time in their lives. I could see the circuit for it already, sitting in the flawed lines of the old tool like an answer waiting to be finished. I set the little seal on my work table and started to draw. Behind me, the sisters held on to each other, and the frontier I had ridden into as a stranger had, somewhere in the last day, quietly become a place with people in it I was not willing to lose. The pendulum swung over the strip of gray cloth on my workbench, and I read the circuits under it one more time to be sure. A buffer, an amplifier, a catch to strain out the noise, so weak it barely earned the name. 3 parts, plain as a child's first tool, drawn by a hand that owned no proper instruments and would not hurry. I had seen the shape of it the day before, and it had stopped me cold. Somebody had built this slowly for Nora because they loved her. It was not a good tool. It had been made with everything the maker had. Rose stirred her vines along the tent wall, and the little tester she'd carried over uncurled itself from around the cloth. I thanked her, and she nodded her one wide bloom, and I unhooked the cable. There, it's sound. I folded the tool back into Nora's hands. Let me fit it on you again. She sat still while I settled the cloth over the lower half of her face, the single blue eye facing out. Arya stood a half step behind her sister's shoulder, close, the way she was always close. That should have been the end of it. Instead, I picked the sealing scroll back up off the bench, the palm-sized one I'd wrapped over her eyes for the inspection, the one that had shut them into the dark for the first time in her life and shown her the dark was rest, not a thing to fear. Nora, give me your hand. She held it out without asking why. I set the scroll in her palm and closed her fingers over it. I've got a few of these, I told her. Take this one. It's yours. For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes went from the scroll to me and back, like she was waiting for the catch. Say the word on it and your eyes go quiet, I said. Whenever the world gets too loud, you don't have to ask me. You don't have to ask anyone. The single painted eye on her cloth stared up at me, but hers, behind it, filled. Thank you, she whispered. Small, so small, and it carried clean across the tent anyway. Arya's shoulders came down an inch, the way a person lets go of a breath they'd been holding for a year. She'll wear it out, she said, dry and warm, sleeping with it in her fist. Nora didn't argue. She closed her hand tighter. I turned back to the bench so they'd have the moment to themselves, and made a show of tidying the tester away. 6 of those scrolls sat rolled in my kit. Back in the capital, a single one was a month's careful work, rationed out of a locked drawer, signed for twice. I'd just given one away to make a frightened girl feel safe, and it had cost me a scrap of parchment and an afternoon. Nobody had signed anything. The sisters had gone to their own tent, and I sat alone with 2 finished tools in front of me and no peace about either of them. I'd built them well. 2 cloth-type seals, one tuned to Nora's 2 eyes, one to Arya's, cleaner and stronger than the old work by every measure I could put a pendulum to. And the whole evening, I kept coming back to the thing that had stopped me at the bench. Better was not the same as kinder. The old cloth was a poor instrument, and it was the most loved thing either of them owned. Hand a person a sharper tool and take the warm one away, and you might leave them worse off than you found them. That was the sort of arithmetic the guild had never once made me do, and out here, it was the only kind that seemed to matter. I set my head in my hands. In the corner, in the basket Rose had woven of her own vines, the little white lizard slept. It had grown. When I'd carried it out of that pond, it fit in one arm, and now it filled the basket. A small ridge risen along its spine that hadn't been there a week ago. I ran a transcription scroll over it the way I did most nights. No sickness, no hurt, nothing wrong that any test I owned could name. It simply would not wake, breathing slow and even, eyes shut, as if something had reached in and sealed its mind away and forgotten to leave the key. I stroked the ridge of its back with one finger. It didn't stir. And somewhere between that cold little body and the 2 tools I couldn't decide about, the answer walked up and tapped me on the shoulder. Not better control. That was the wrong road, the road I'd been grinding down for years. What if I stopped trying to soften a thing that never wanted softening and just built a switch? On, off, sight or no sight, thrown clean, quicker than a blink, and thrown by the tool itself the instant it was needed, so the wearer never had to hold the strain at all. Keep the comfort, cut the cruelty, let the eye rest by default, and open only when it was called. I reached for blank parchment before I'd finished the thought. For a long while, the only sound was the pen. Circuit after circuit, the diagrams coming faster than I could have explained them, my old alchemy texts open and half ignored beside me, because for once, I was ahead of the book. The trick was the timing. Leave the eye sealed by default, and hand hang a trigger off the wearer's own intent, so the seal snapped open the instant she reached for the sight and fell shut again the moment she was done. No holding, no strain, the tool carrying the weight she'd carried by hand her whole life. I sketched the failsafe 3 ways before I liked one, then drew it clean. I hadn't worked like this in years. Maybe I had never been let, because I let myself count it then. The thing I'd been holding at arm's length since the morning the check was written. 1 batch. 1 run of Hazewood fruit, turned over in a single night, sold to a neighboring lord for more than twice what my whole department had been given to live on for an entire year. Not my wages, the department, all of it. The reagents, the tools, the salaries, the year. I'd fought for that budget in 9 winters of meetings and been handed errands instead. Kept around a lab I'd rebuilt to fetch water and carry crates, while men who couldn't distill clean rainwater called it my proper level. I could still name the errands, walk a sealed crate 3 floors down because a senior didn't want to smell it, stand in a hall an hour so a client had someone to hand his coat to, sign for the very scrolls I'd invented as though I were the stockroom and not the man who'd drawn them. I'd swallowed all of it, year on year, because saying anything had never once moved the number at the bottom of the budget sheet. And at the end of it, they'd handed me a department with nothing left in it at all and expected me to thank them for the chair. Out here, nobody rationed me a thing. I asked Rose for a workbench, and she grew one. I wanted 6 sealing scrolls, and I made 60. A lord had put her own name behind a room and told me to fill it. The number that had followed me out the guild door like a shadow. I could set it beside the number on that check now, and for the first time, the second one was bigger, and the first one couldn't touch me. I'd wanted to be somewhere my work meant something. I bent back over the parchment, and my hand was steady, and I understood that I already was. I called the sisters back before I could talk myself out of it. They came in blinking at the light, and I set the 2 new tools on the cleared bench where the old cloths had lain. Nora's wasn't cloth at all now. It was a slim frame of pale alloy, folded small, and when she picked it up, it opened in her hands and reached out to hook over her ears like a pair of spectacles. "Try them on," I said. "Hook that arm over your ear. That's it. Now take the cloth off your face." Her hands stopped. Taking the cloth off in front of anyone was a thing she had never once done. Arya touched her wrist, just touched it, and Nora reached up and unknotted the gray strip and let it fall. I'd never seen the whole of her face before. Neither, I think, had most of the camp. She looked younger than the spear made her, and she looked, once the new frames were sitting right, completely unremarkable. A girl in glasses, blinking at a lamp, which was the entire point. Underneath them, the alloy was doing its quiet work, each eye sealed on its own, thrown open and shut faster than she could feel it, so the world came to her plain and steady and hers. "They suit you," I said, and meant it. Nora turned her head one way and the other, testing the weight. "It's quiet," she said. "In here." She pressed a fingertip lightly to the frame's arm. "What's this?" "Controls. A touch here changes what the eye does. Far sight, see-through, rest, or full open. I'll walk you through everyone before you rely on it." She folded the old gray cloth into a careful square and tucked it inside her jacket, over the scroll. She didn't say why, and I didn't ask. Some things you keep even when you don't need them anymore, especially then. Arya's was smaller, a single lens on a fine frame, a monocle to sit over her left eye, the one that reached a few seconds down the road when trouble was coming. Hers had frightened me to touch. A future that flickered was not a thing to yank a seal off of blindly, so I'd built hers to hold, not to strip, to rest that one eye shut and let it open only when it wanted to. She fit it herself, slow, and went very still as it settled. "Oh," she said softly, behind where the cloth used to be. "Just that. All right, she said, and I heard the smile in it. "It's like setting something heavy down." I walked Nora through the controls one at a time, and she picked them up quicker than I'd have believed. A touch, and she read the maker's mark stamped inside a sealed reagent tin across the tent without opening it. Another touch, and her gaze went long, tracking a bird I couldn't hear moving somewhere past the canvas. Then the last one, both eyes sealed. The dark she'd learned wasn't frightening, and she held it a moment, on purpose, just to prove to herself she could reach for it and come back. When she opened them again, she was still smiling. Karen caught me the next morning before I could get back to the river with the sisters. There was a charter on her table, half written in a scribe's careful hand, and Miles beside it with his tally sticks and that easy trader's smile, and the 2 of them looked far too pleased with themselves for so early in the day. "Sit," Karen said, which from her was an order and an invitation both. She turned the charter around so it faced me. "The neighbor lord wants the trade set down proper. Who's making the crystals? Under whose banner? The whole business. Which means the department wants a name. Your department." She tapped the empty line with one blunt finger. So, name it. Miles slid the pen across the table before I'd reached for it. My lord's clerks will copy it into every ledger between here and the coast, he said, pleasant and precise. Whatever you write, a great many people will be saying it by winter. No pressure at all. I looked at the blank line for a while. I could have named it after the guild's grand halls, the way half the ambitious men I'd trained under named things. For weight, for the sound of importance. I thought about the room I actually had. Rose's vines holding up the walls. A lamp. Two sisters who'd taken their faces off in front of me because they trusted the work of my hands. A frozen lizard in a basket that I was going to save if it took me the rest of my life. I wrote one word, Hearthlight. Karen leaned over to read it upside down, and for once, she didn't laugh or tease. She just looked at it and then at me. Hearthlight, she said, and made it sound like a thing decided rather than a thing suggested. Head of the Hearthlight Order, founded and named this morning, witnessed by a lord and a lord's own clerk. She straightened and folded her arms, grinning now. Try telling anyone back in the capital that, and watch their faces. I set the pen down. I don't plan on telling them anything. That stopped her grin for half a beat. Then it came back, wider, because she'd known me long enough to know I meant it. There was no letter going south, no note to the men who'd handed me an empty room, no line to the president who'd signed my worth down to nothing. They could hear about the Hearthlight Order the same way everyone else would, if they heard at all. Spoken by strangers, in the ordinary run of business, a name in a trade ledger between one lord and another. I wasn't building it to be seen from the capital. I was building it because it was mine to build. Miles blotted the charter, delighted. My hands have been itching for exactly this kind of business, he said, and reached for the next page. By midday, the river gave us the test I couldn't have set up on purpose. Since Ippo cleared the old catfish out of the lower pond, the armor salmon had come up the river in a mob. Big, ugly fish monsters plated in scale so hard that even Kareen, who could lift a communication rig one-handed, couldn't crack one with a straight blow. You didn't break an armor salmon. You found the gap between the plates and you put a point through it. And to do that, you had to see exactly where the gap was, through a wall of white water. Nora stood in the shallows and did it again and again without missing. One thrust, one fish. The spearhead slipping through a seam I couldn't even find with my eyes until she'd already found it with hers. She wasn't hunting so much as answering a question the river kept asking, and every answer was correct. When she waded back to me, her face was open to the sun and lit up like a lamp. Any trouble with them? I asked. None. She turned the spear in her grip, thinking. The suppression's exactly right. The world's just clear. I'm not fighting it. Far sight to see through and back is smooth. The voice command's clever, but touch is safer in the water. She held the frame out toward me and pointed. I hold the spear in my right hand. Can you move every control to the left temple? All of them. This side. Got it. Hand it here. She gave them over and I crouched on a dry rock with the frame open across my knee. And I rewrote the touch lines right there, sliding every control across to the left arm. The sun warm on my neck and the river loud beside me. It took less time than the request had. There. Done. She fit them back on, checked each control with the pad of one finger, and then she kicked her shoes off, both of them, and went straight back into the river like a child turned loose on a pond, spear up, laughing. Actually, laughing. The blunt, wary girl who'd leveled a weapon at me the first day I walked into this camp, splashing into the current after fish for the sheer joy of getting to see the world and not be punished for it. A little way downstream, Arya stood on the bank with her monocle catching the light. A salmon broke the surface in a leap, a heavy silver arc against the sun, and before it reached the top of that arc, her spear was already there, already waiting at the exact spot in empty air where the fish was about to be, so that it more or less impaled itself on a point she'd set a breath early. She lowered the spear, unbothered, like she'd done nothing at all. I watched the two of them, the one hunting on borrowed seconds, and the one hunting through solid scale, both of them soaked and grinning in the same river, and I thought, before I could stop the thought, anyone could tell those two were sisters. Downstream, without turning around, Arya smiled behind where her cloth used to be. No, she called, over the water. But that's a little bit right. I laughed. I couldn't help it. A man is entitled to feel a chill when a woman answers a question he never said out loud, and I let it go by because I was too content to guard my own thoughts, and there was no one here I needed to guard them from. 6 months ago, I'd ridden north out of a city that measured me down to nothing. A man they kept around to fetch and carry, carrying a pack and a letter, and no clear idea what waited at the end of the road. Now the pack held a grove's worth of hazewood, and the road had ended here. A camp turning into a town, an order with my name at the head of it, a lizard I meant to wake, and a lord who'd bet on me, and two sisters teaching a cold river how to laugh. I had wanted, more than the money, more than the title, more than any of it, to stand somewhere my work meant something. I stood on that riverbank in the noise and the spray and looked at the whole rough shape of it, and I finally let myself call it by its name. It was a home. I'd built the shape of a home out of the things everyone else had thrown away. A cursed knight left to die in the grass. A dying village nobody would supply. 2 sisters the world was frightened of. A lizard drowning in a pond. And every last one of them had turned around and chosen me back. The guild had measured me and found nothing worth keeping. Out here, I'd been measured too, by people with harder eyes than any president, and they'd kept me. That was the difference nobody in the capital would ever understand. You couldn't sign for it, and you couldn't cut it from a budget. It was just here, soaked and loud and laughing in a cold river, and it was mine because I'd made it. Nora came up out of the water, hauling 2 salmon by the tails, shouting for me to come look. Arya waiting in behind her to say she'd caught the bigger one first. I went down into the shallows to look, and the river soaked through my boots, and I didn't mind at all. The news came up the trade road folded inside a shipment tally in Harold's careful accountant's hand. I read it twice at my workbench while the morning light came flat and cold through the canvas. Old-type crystals were flooding the capital market. Cheap, steady, better than anything the guild had put out in a year. And there were suddenly thousands of them, moving through every wholesaler between here and the capital. Harold had done what Harold always did and traced the supply back along the ledgers. And the ledgers pointed north, to a caravan out of a lord's territory that nobody had heard of 12 months ago. To me, he didn't write my name. He didn't have to. His last line just said, "Whoever's making these has cut the floor out from under the guild's whole weapons division." Thought you'd want to know. I set the letter flat on the bench and looked at it for a while. I would like to say I felt nothing. That wouldn't be true. The returned stock reports came a few days behind it, carried in with miles and the trade tally, because a thing that size cannot stay quiet on a road that busy. The guild had mass-produced its new line, the Kingfire crystals, and shipped them to every wholesaler on the strength of its name. The wholesalers had bought. Then the old-type crystals turned up on the same shelves at a fraction of the price and twice the working life, and every buyer in the kingdom did the same simple sum. The new stock came back, not a crate here and there, in bulk. Wagon loads of it rolling back through the gates it had rolled out of, and every wagon a figure written in red in somebody's book. The strange thing, the thing Harold couldn't see from his side of the ledger, was how ordinary it all looked from mine. I hadn't set out to drown anyone's market. I had simply started making the old crystals again, the honest way, the way I'd made them for years, and sold them through miles along the neighbor lord's route because the frontier needed the coin. From the capital, it must have looked like an ambush, a flood of perfect crystals appearing out of nowhere and undercutting the guild in every town at once. From here, it was only a man doing his work and selling it at a fair price, the way I had never once been allowed to inside those walls. Nobody on the trade road knew the two things were the same thing. Nobody knew the alchemist filling their crates was the man the guild had thrown out. For 9 years, I had made the base materials that division ran on, and for 9 years, the number beside my department had been shaved thinner, until the morning they wrote a 0 on it and told me to be grateful I wasn't being fired. They had called me the gopher to my face the whole time, because a man who fetches and carries can't be worth much. Now the fetching had stopped, and it turned out the whole tower had been standing on the errand boy. I didn't send them a word. I had a lord's charter and an order with my own name over the door, and a camp full of people the guild would have thrown away too. I folded Harold's letter into my coat, went back to the bench, and let the ledgers do the talking for me. The order Voss gave was the one I would have paid to overhear. Fix it, or go north and bring Rust back. I heard how it went in that office later, pieced out of Harold's letters, and the kind of rumor that runs a trade road faster than any wagon. Voss had the complaint reports waiting in a stack on the desk when Roderick came up, and he pushed the whole thing across the wood without bothering to stand. Every sheet was a client the division had lost. He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. The man measured the world in figures, and the figures were doing his shouting for him. He reminded Roderick, flat and unhurried, exactly who had stood in that office a year before and sworn that basic research was dead weight, who had promised the gopher would never be missed, who had said dissolving the department would save a line on the budget and cost the guild nothing at all. Then he told him to fix the failures himself, or ride north and beg. Roderick stood there with the sour reek of his own division still soaked into his coat and felt the floor tilt under him. He would not do it. He told himself he would sooner set fire to the storeroom than ride out to some mud track frontier and say the words aloud, that he had been wrong, that he needed the man he had spat on, that every crystal the guild had ever sold was built on the silent work of the one he had called menial. The refusal held for exactly as long as it took him to look down at the stack of reports and understand that not one of those sheets would stop coming, that the numbers were his now, that there was no version of the next month in which he kept his chair without the man he could not replace. The certainty drained out of him the way heat leaves a room, slow and total, and what lay underneath it when it was gone was very close to fear. Voss gave him no comfort and no way out. The way the story reached me, he laid it plain as a receipt. The guild had a name and a building and a wall of ledgers, and none of the three could distill a single bottle of master-grade water. That had always been someone else's hands. The someone was gone, and every buyer in the kingdom had noticed inside a season. Fix it or fetch him. There was no third door. That is the part I keep out of all of it, not the crash of the numbers. The moment the man who had named me the errand boy sat down and worked the same sum everyone else had already worked, got the same answer, and hated every figure of it. Roderick went back down to his own division and found it worse than the office he had just left. The stink from his slime accident still hung faint and sour in the corridors, and the apprentices bent low over the benches and pretended to work as he passed, the way people do when a temper is out looking for somewhere to land. Simon met him with the tally he least wanted. The eldest of the apprentices had a gift for softening bad news, and even he couldn't soften this one. The returns weren't slowing. They were arriving faster than the floor could count them. Wagons queued at the delivery door with more behind, and there was nowhere left to stack the crates. The division that had bragged loudest in the whole guild was drowning in its own product, and every man on the floor could see it, but the one who had ordered it made. Roderick did what cornered men do. He went hunting for anyone to blame except the mirror. He sent Simon running down the line of communication devices to every wholesaler in the ledger, demanding to know who was undercutting them, certain it had to be betrayal, a smuggling ring, a rival guild working from a stolen technique. Anything at all but the plain fact that the old crystals were simply better, simply cheaper, and simply not his. No guild alchemist would sell them out, he kept saying, and no back alley alchemist alive had that technique. He was half right. The alchemist wasn't in a back alley, and he wasn't selling anyone out. He was a long way north, working, at last, somewhere that wanted him. The wholesalers all said the same thing back down the device, and none of it was what Roderick wanted. The other crystals were better, and they were cheaper, and there was nothing anyone could do about that but return the stock they were stuck with. Then he ran the deficit himself, and the numbers didn't care how hard he was breathing. Lost sales down one column, returned stock down the other, and between them, a hole the division would not climb out of inside a year. Somewhere in that hour, he said it low, to no one, that he would sooner die than crawl to rust and ask. Simon heard him. Simon told someone, that someone told it on down the road, and in time it reached me. He would remember saying that. Later, I would make certain that he did. There was no room for the returned crates, so he gave the order without thinking twice about it. Clear the old storeroom, the basic research storeroom, sealed since the day they emptied my department, and shelved the new stock in it. Then a runner came down for him. President Voss wanted him upstairs again, which told him better than any report how high the trouble had already climbed. He went, and he left the storeroom to the apprentices, and that was the last careless order he gave before careless stopped being funny. Here is the part none of us knew. Not me at my bench, not Harold in his ledgers, not one living soul at the frontier. I only put it together long afterward, when it was far too late to matter to anyone. Trent took a crew into the old storeroom to clear it, Nate among them. They found rows of sealed crates with the writing on the wood faded soft with age, and they were not the sort of men who stopped to read faded writing. Inside were bottles of a liquid clear as water, no color to it at all. Trent tipped one out over the back of his hand, watched nothing happen, and pronounced it a failed potion. No color, no value. Exactly the kind of junk he had expected the dead department to have hoarded. Nate laughed and said the poor fools had even saved their garbage. Trent told him to pour the whole lot into the river. The undersides of the crate lids were labeled in a careful, patient hand. Concentrated mana solution. Under the name, the handling warnings, line by line. Not one of them turned a lid over. The knowledge that would have made them turn it over had walked out the door with the department a year before, and there was nobody left in that building who valued the kind of slow work that fills a bottle like that. So to them, It was clear liquid in old glass, and clear liquid goes down a drain. I had made that solution in my early years, a bottle at a time, because it took weeks to concentrate and I could never build up much of it. On skin, it did nothing. You could very nearly drink it, but poured into a monster, it was raw strength going straight into the blood. A few drops went a long way, and there were crates of it standing in that storeroom, years of my patience sealed in glass. The river behind the guild tower ran east and downstream, out to where the coast water turns brackish, and the armor salmon come in their thousands every season to spawn. Bottle after bottle went into the current, clear into clear, nothing to see. The men laughed about the poor dead department while they poured, tipped the last of the crates over the bank, and then went into their supper. The river took every drop of it and carried it down and down toward the sea, toward the shallows already thick with fish packed fin to fin, feeding, laying, taking in whatever the water carried to them. Armor salmon are hard beasts on an ordinary day. Their scale turns a spear. You strike the gaps, or you don't strike at all. I had told Nora that much at the riverbank not a week before, watching her hunt them for sport. I did not yet have any reason to think of them again. Nobody saw a thing happen. That was the whole trouble. Something was already happening. It simply hadn't come back upstream yet. Roderick did not ride north to beg. He rode north to kill me. I put most of this together afterward. From the two blades, a frontier patrol scraped half dead off the waist, and from what came later. But it happened. And it happened the way everything he touched by then happened. He would not crawl. Voss had told him to fetch me back or fix what I'd broken, and out on that road, he had picked a third door no one had offered him. Hire men. Take me from behind. Feed what was left to the monsters, so nobody up in the capital would ever have to ask where I'd gone. He brought 3 of them up from the Adventurers Guild, cheap blades who did shady work for coin and didn't ask what for. The loudest of the 3 was a man named Dean. He armed them himself. He put his own custom guns in their hands. The attribute change models, the fire circuits, the ones he'd built with his own 2 hands and was proud of. He named the make to them like he was handing out a gift. He told Dean to strike me from the back and burn me down before I ever turned around. And he muttered the whole time, sweating in the heat, that Voss had only ever spoken the recall order aloud and never once put it on paper. Nothing traceable, nothing with a name on it. That was the plan. A plan like that needs quiet men. Roderick had never once in his life been a quiet man. His complaining carried out across the rock, and the rock answered him. A snake vine came up out of a crevice, one of the small ones that live out there, the kind so tuned to noise they boil out of the stone the second the world gets loud. Dean laughed and fired. The fireball tore the thing apart. It also announced to every other crevice on the waist exactly where 4 men were standing. More came, and the blades did what men with brand new toys always do. They fired, and they fired again, and they whooped between shots, and they paid no mind at all to Roderick screaming at them to hold. Then his own tech did the thing his tech had been doing all year long. Dean's gun overheated in his grip and misfired, and the flame kicked back and singed his hair and his brows down to stubble. The other 2 hauled on their triggers over crystals already burned dry, so they turned on the man who'd hired them. Spare stones, they said. Spare guns. Hand them over. He had none. He'd brought exactly enough for 1 clean murder and not a single grain past it. So the 3 of them ran. They ran, still screaming, straight toward another nest they never saw. And they left Roderick standing alone in the open as the vines came boiling up on every side of him. The guns he sold the frontier had failed the frontier. Now the same guns, in the same maker's own hands, on the same maker's own errand, had failed him too. Word of it reached me days later, and whatever I'd told myself about being done with the man, it stirred something in me all the same. Alone, and far too proud to die screaming over vermin, Roderick reached for the one thing he had kept back for himself. It was an old scroll, yellowed, rare, the kind that holds a great deal of stored power, folded up inside it for one desperate use. He broke it, and it did its work. The swarm was thrown back off him. The waste went quiet again. He lived, but he did not walk out of that hole. I will tell it the way it came to me, because that is the only honest way I have to tell it. By the time the last of the vines stopped moving, something in him had been hurt, badly, and in a place he would let no living person see. He drank a potion, and it closed the surface over the way potions do. Whatever was underneath it, it left alone. He got to his feet shaking, held together on the outside and wrong somewhere on the inside, and he did not turn for home. He turned north, toward me. He'd had time out there, in the quiet after, to decide exactly how he wanted this. He would not simply kill me now. That was too clean, too quick, and he had bled for more than a clean death would pay him. He wanted me to hope first. He wanted me to hear that the guild wanted me back, to feel the old wound draw shut, to let myself believe it all the way down. And then he would take it away from me in front of my own face and stand there and watch it go out of me. That was the thing he carried north, tucked in close beside the hurt he was hiding from everyone. And something else rode with him that I could not have put a name to yet. A man does not usually drag a ruined body 100 miles on a grudge alone. A grudge burns hot and burns out. What was steering Roderick north had gone cold and steady, the way a thing gets steady when there's a second hand on the wheel. There was someone behind him he never once spoke of, reaching in over his shoulder from a long way off, and it would be a good while yet before any of us learned whose hand it was, or how much of what he did out there had ever really been his own idea. He limped toward the frontier. He hid the hurt the whole way, and he smiled the whole way, and the smile was the part that should have frightened people most. While all of that was crawling its slow way toward me, I was down on my knees in a field, pulling the magic out of the dirt. You have to, before you farm fresh ground this far north. Soil packed too full of mana grows nothing worth putting in your mouth. The crops come up sickly and wither, or worse, they come up and they don't stay crops. So you take the mana out of the ground first. Hippo dug the holes, 8 legs throwing dirt faster than any crew of men could, and I walked along behind him, marking the spots and sinking a drain into each one, the bulb-shaped kind with the metal pipes. I keyed them all with a control scroll, and the magic lifted up off the whole field in slow, bright swirls and burned away to nothing in the open air. While it ran, there was nothing to do but wait. So we waited. Hippo folded himself down flat in the sun, and I sat back against his warm side with a scroll tilted up overhead for a bit of shade, and I read. It was a thesis on soil, on how a little leftover mana left in the ground actually makes wheat taste better, because the body reads the mana it soaks up as flavor, and the mind goes ahead and believes it. Dry reading. I'd copied it, and every other paper like it, out of the old library before I walked out of the guild's doors for the last time. I took the whole shelf. I'd known even then that the man they were leaving in charge of that room would throw every page of it away without reading a line, and I had been right about that, the same way I had turned out to be right about most of him. Ippo grunted. The drains were done. I pulled the nearest one and swung my pendulum out over the open hole, watched it settle, and nodded to myself. The level had come down exactly where I wanted it. Good ground now. The kind of ground you can feed people from through a hard winter. Quiet work, unglamorous work. The exact work they'd told me for years that any errand boy could do. I sat there in my own field with the taste of the coming harvest already half figured, and I did not yet know that the man I'd copied that whole library to outlast was already most of the way to my gate. Arya came at a dead run across the turned soil, one hand pressed flat to the monocle to hold it steady over her eye. Master Rust, someone's come for you. She pulled up short in front of me, out of breath. I think this one's trouble. I straightened and knocked the dirt off my knees. A visitor? We got those now. Caravan men and a lord's clerks. All of them about the crystals. Did he give a name? Roderick. The whole afternoon changed shape around the word. I hadn't heard it said out loud in a long while, and I found I didn't need her to say it twice for it to land where it landed. Of course it was Roderick. The crystals had drowned the guild's whole market by then, Miles's route carrying them south by the cartload, and somewhere down in the capital, a man I used to stand shoulder to shoulder with had finally sat down and done the arithmetic and come all this way to see the trouble with his own eyes. I told Arya to run word ahead to the camp that I was coming in, and I whistled Ippo up onto his feet. I wasn't afraid. I want to be honest about that part. I was tired, in the exact way you get tired when a thing you walked a very long road to get free of turns, upstanding at the end of your new one anyway. I settled Arya behind me on Hippo's back and tapped his shoulder 3 times for an easy pace, and we started in for the camp. Roderick never could stand me, I told her as we rode. Years of it. If he's dragged himself all the way out here, it's about the crystals. He'll want to know how I make them, or he'll want me to stop making them. I meant it to steady her. She'd gone quiet at my back, and quiet was not like Arya. Then her hand closed on my sleeve, hard. It isn't clear, she said, and her voice had already gone thin and far away from me. Rust, this isn't an ordinary fight. I felt her go rigid against my spine. The mana in her sighted eye had snagged on something far too big for it, and it was dragging her down into itself, whether she wanted to go or not. It's huge, she breathed. A battle, not a duel between 2 men, a war. I told her to hold on to me and not to force the eye. She didn't hear a word of it. The vision had her whole now, and it came up out of her in broken pieces, and each piece landed colder on me than the one before. A turning point of fate, she said. The best choice and the worst choice, worth exactly the same. Her fingers dug into my arm. Wind, all across the wilderness. 2 men. Her voice fell to almost nothing at all, and a hand reaching in over the top of all of it. The hooded one, the curse user. She flinched on the last word, like the sight of it had burned her, and behind me, her whole body drew tight as a bowstring, while the eye held on to the thing it had found and would not let go. That was the name I had been half waiting years to hear somebody say out loud. Hearing it out here, in the open wind, with a ruined man already limping his way toward my home, was worse than anything Roderick could ever have carried in his coat. Roderick was a grudge you can see coming and stand and meet. This was a whole season turning over, and I understood, sitting there with the wind pulling at us both, that the bitter man riding for my gate was only the near edge of it, that the real weight of the thing was still out past the horizon where even her eye could barely reach. The best choice and the worst one, she'd said, worth exactly the same. A crossroads where doing right and doing wrong cost a man the identical price. I turned that fragment over and over the rest of the ride and did not like a single way it came to rest. The mana scattered out of her left eye all at once. She swayed, her weight went loose, and she started to slide down off the saddle. I caught her, one arm around her, and I held her upright against me until the shaking wore itself out and she came back into herself. Thank you, Rust. Her voice was very small. I'm all right now. She wasn't. Not quite, and neither was I. But there are some things a man says out loud precisely because saying them is the first stone of making them true. I'll protect everyone, I told her. All of you, because we're family. I felt her go still at that. I don't say things like that often, and she knew it as well as anyone alive did. A year before, I'd have called the word a luxury I couldn't afford. The guild had spent a long time teaching me I was a tool they owned, and not a man anyone kept. But these people had taken in a discarded alchemist, and a pair of feared sisters, and a cursed knight, and every other soul the world had thrown out. And somewhere in the building of it, they'd quietly become the thing I'd promised to stand in front of. I was a little embarrassed by the word, even then, even out there in the wind. I did not take it back. Then, I gave Apo's shoulder one single tap, and all 8 legs opened up beneath us, and we ran for the camp with the whole waste blurring past on either side. A bitter man already at my gate, a war standing up on the horizon, and somewhere behind the both of them, a cold hand I had not yet seen, reaching out across all of it for my home. I brought Hippo down to a walk at the last rise, because Arya's hand had tightened on my coat, and she was still shaking from the vision. I told her she should turn back and rest. She said no. She wanted to see this one through with her own eyes, and there was a set to her jaw I had learned months ago not to argue with. So I let her stay in the saddle behind me, and I felt her breathing steady itself by force, one slow pull at a time. Nora was waiting where the track met the camp fence, spear already down off her shoulder. She lifted a hand and called me over, quick and low, and I steered Ippo to her without a word. Then she fell in on foot beside us and told me to be careful, that the presence around the man at the gate was wrong. Not a rank she could read, not quite a thing that was still all the way human. She would know. Her eyes go straight through skin to whatever a body is really carrying, and whatever she had looked at up ahead, it had put an edge in her voice I did not hear from her often. I asked her if it was a man or a monster. She was quiet a moment, then she said she was no longer sure the two were separate things in his case. That should have frightened me more than it did, but I had spent the whole ride braced for a battle Arya had already promised was coming, and a cold word from Nora only settled the last of it into place. Whatever waited at the gate, it was here. There was no more wondering left to do about it. We came over the rise, and I saw it. Karen stood in the middle of the gate in black meteor iron plate, the full war plate she only wears when she has decided to end something. Her greatsword planted point down in the dirt with both gauntlets folded on the pommel. She is a head shorter than most of her fighters. In that armor, with that blade, she filled the whole opening like a wall someone had built there on purpose and left. And on the far side of her, kept out in the cold scrub where he could not pass, was a ragged man I almost did not know. I gave Ippo a single tap. We closed the last of the ground at a run. It was Roderick. I swung down off Ippo and walked the last stretch on my own feet, and even then I had to look twice to be sure of him. The last time I had stood this close to the man, he was pocketing 2 of my sealed water bottles inside his coat like they were his by right, tossing some insult over his shoulder on the way to the president's office, wearing the sneer of someone who has never once had to wonder whether the room would let him keep talking. That was the Roderick I had carried around in my head. That was the one I had braced to face. This was not that man. This one was gaunt and gray in the face. Dust worked into every seam of clothes that had been fine once and were ruined now. He favored one side without seeming to know that he did it, holding something in against his ribs that he would not name and would not show. A burned out gun hung dead and useless at his hip. and over the whole wreck of him, he wore a thin, fixed smile that did not move when his eyes moved. The smile of a man holding a door shut from the inside against something pushing back. Nora had been right. There was a wrongness on him you could nearly feel from where I stood, a cold with no source I could point to, sitting on the air around him like frost that would not melt. But I did not have the room, just then, to go chasing what it was. The man in front of me was asking to be dealt with first. Karen's shoulders came down half an inch when she heard my step. She did not turn her head. She only said, "Rust, you came," in a voice trying hard to sound like nothing at all and not quite getting there. I laid a hand flat on the black pauldron of her armor. She cut her eyes to me sidelong, asking without asking. I told her, low, that I had this one, that this one was mine to answer, and had been for a long time. For a breath, she held her ground out of pure habit. Then she drew the greatsword up out of the dirt with a slow scrape, and she stepped back, and she let me take the place where she had been standing. So I stood in the gate of my own home, with my own people at my back, and the open dark at his, and I faced the man who had called me a gopher. It is a small thing to describe and a strange thing to feel. A year ago, I would have flinched from him out of pure reflex, the way you flinch from a hand that has struck you before. Now I looked at him across a few feet of cold ground and felt my own weight settle down into my heels, even and quiet, because I knew exactly what stood behind me and exactly what stood behind him. Behind me were torches and a fence, and a camp full of people who were alive because I had come here. Behind him was empty black scrub and a guild that had already begun to eat itself. He had not chosen where to make his stand. I had. He did not spend a word on how far he had ridden to get here, or on what it had cost him. He drew himself up as straight as the hurt in his side would allow, pulled that smile a notch tighter, and made his announcement like a man handing down a blessing from a great height. The Alchemy Guild, he informed me, had reconsidered. The basic research department was being reinstated, formally, officially. Every function restored, every door reopened. And in its boundless generosity, the guild was prepared to take me back into my old post, with all my old duties waiting exactly as I had left them. He said the word restored the way you'd hold out a scrap to a starving dog and expect it to weep with gratitude for the hand. I should be thankful, he let me understand. I should be honored. The glorious guild, in its mercy, was going to permit me to work inside its walls again. When I did not answer at once, he pressed. He heard the silence as bargaining, I think, because he began to sweeten it the way a man sweetens a thing he has already decided you cannot refuse. There could be a better title this time, he suggested. A proper line in the budget. Terms no one had offered me before. He laid each one down like a coin on a table, watching my face for the place where I would break and be grateful. And the more he offered, the more clearly I could hear the thing underneath the offering, that he needed me to take it, that every coin he set down was one he could not afford to lose. I stood and let the whole thing wash over me, and the entire time I was waiting for the pull. That was the strange part of it. I had spent years bracing for some version of this without ever admitting I was doing it. The guild coming back around, wanting me, saying my name like the name meant something. Through 1,000 swallowed answers in those halls, I had been half waiting for a day exactly like this one, and now here it was, standing out in the cold in a dead man's smile, offering me the thing a younger version of me might have wept for, and nothing in me reached back for it. The place where the wanting should have been had been quietly filled in, months back, by other things, and I had been too busy living inside them to notice it close over. For one breath, I let myself see it from behind his eyes, because I think I needed to be certain of what I was truly looking at. He had staked everything he had left on this errand. That was the thing under the smile, the door he was holding shut. Somewhere behind him, a president had finally run out of patience and out of doors, and this was the last one Roderick had. Bring the exile home and be worth something again. Come back empty-handed and be nothing. Be swept out with the rot. Every crate the guild could not fill without me. Every buyer who had walked away. Every ledger bleeding the wrong color down in that building. All of it had been loaded onto a single wager, that he could stand in front of me and make me crave my old chains back badly enough to put them on myself. He was not offering me a gift at all. He was begging for his own life and dressing the begging up as charity, because charity was the only shape his pride could still bear to hold. And he needed my yes so desperately that somewhere on the long road north, he had convinced himself the answer was already his. Then I was standing in my own gate again, in my own skin, with the torches warm at my back, and I gave him the answer he had come 100 miles to hear. No, I said. Not a chance. He blinked, the way a man blinks at a word spoken in a language he had stopped expecting to hear. I didn't lose that department, I told him. I left it. There's a difference, and you never once understood it. So let me be plain for you, just this once, since we're both here. I quit because I wanted to. Losing the department was only the trigger. It was the thing that finally let me do what I should have done years before I did it. I heard my own voice hold level, and I was glad of it, because level was the only way the rest of it was worth saying. You cut my line to 0. You remember that? Not a trim, 0. And then you stood there and told me to be grateful you weren't firing me outright, and you called me a gopher in the hall on your way to say it. I checked 1,000 bottles a day in that place with my name on not one of them, and I said nothing every single time, because in all those years, saying something had never moved a number on your budget sheet by so much as a coin. I let that sit in the cold air a moment, and I let him look at where saying it had gotten me. Out here, my research goes further in a season than it went in a decade under your roof. My budget is larger than anything Voss ever put his name to. I cured a whole camp of a sickness that was killing it in a day. I pull crystals out of empty air by the cartload. I heard the list come out of me plainly, one true thing after another, and none of it was the part that mattered. And those two behind me, the world called them monsters and hunted them for the eyes in their heads. Out here, I built them a place to stand, and I gave them back a quiet they'd never had. They call me family now. Do you understand what I'm telling you? The gopher you couldn't be bothered to keep has a family and a home and work that means something to somebody. That is what the frontier handed the man you threw out. And the people standing behind me right now, I did not turn, but I lifted my chin toward them, toward the sisters and the Lord in black iron, would tear that guild down to its foundation stones before they let me walk back through its gate. So no, there is nothing in that building you could offer me. There is nothing left in that whole city I want. His smile was still fixed to his face. It had stopped meaning anything at all. So if that's the whole of what you wrote up here to say, I finished, then you've said it. Go home. For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind came flat across the scrub and dragged at his ruined coat, and I watched the last thing he had carried north on, the certainty, the whole wager, drain out of his gray face and leave nothing behind it. I did not feel triumph, exactly. I had honestly thought I might. I had carried the shape of this moment around inside me for so long that I half expected it to burst like a struck blister when it finally came. Instead, there was only a wide, level quiet, the kind that comes when a fever finally breaks, in the small hours, and leaves you clear and weak and yourself again. The wound that had torn open in that office the day the number went to 0, I felt it close over, not ripped shut, just finished. The way a door swings quietly closed once you understand, there was never anything on the far side of it worth holding open. Behind me, very softly, Arya let out a breath she had been keeping. Nora had not lowered the spear a hair, and off to my side, I heard Corin shift her weight in all that black iron, the way she does right before she decides a conversation is over. But she held because I had asked her to, and she trusted me to know when I was finished. I was finished. There was nothing else to say to him, and for the first time in the whole history of the two of us, I did not want to say it. The wanting to be heard by that man was gone out of me completely. I turned to go back through my own gate, and out in front of me, in the going dark, Roderick began to laugh. It started low in his chest and climbed until it stopped sounding like a man at all. The fixed smile broke apart into it. Whatever he had been holding shut behind that door came up through the laughing, and the cold Nora had warned me of came up with it. Thick now, thick enough that I felt it crawl along both my arms and settle at the back of my neck. He cut off as suddenly as he'd started. Then, in that brittle, cracked voice, he told me it couldn't be helped. If I would not come back, if I would not save him, then he would simply crush me where I stood instead, and everything would be well again. Everything would be perfectly well, he said, as long as not a single witness was left standing to carry the tale of what had happened at this gate. That was when I understood that he had not come north only to bring me back. He had come with a second answer already loaded, in case the first one failed, and he did not seem to feel the weight of it at all. A man in his right mind does not talk about erasing witnesses at the gate of a frontier lord. Whatever was steering him had walked him a long way past his right mind and left the reins hanging. His hand went into his coat and came out with a scroll. I already had one open in my own fist before he finished the motion. I had readied it on the ride in because Arya had told me a battle was coming, and I had learned a long while ago to take that woman at her exact word. Roderick. I put the whole flat weight of his name into it, and I tried, even then, even here, to hand him one last door. Master rank killing master rank is forbidden. You do this, and at the very best, you lose your license. Everything you have left. Do you even understand what it is you're about to do? He did not care. I saw it in his eyes a half second before he moved, that he was already past the place where losing his license could reach him, that whatever cold hand had been steering him up the northern road had steered him clean out of the last of his reason and left nothing at the reins. He tore the scroll wide. Something came out of his open palm. It swelled up out of his hand far faster than anything had a right to, unfolding and hardening as it rose, until a great pale mushroom beast stood hunched and swaying over him in the torchlight, a swollen fungal bulk on a thick pale stalk. Its wide crown bowed low like a hanging head, wrong all the way through in a way that had nothing to do with any alchemy I had ever been taught. And I finally felt what Nora had felt from the rise. It came off the thing in a wave, that same sourceless cold, riding the beast like a hand riding a puppet. This was not Roderick's craft. Roderick forged fire and metal. He had never in his life made anything that felt like this. Something else had reached in through him and left this behind, the way a hand leaves a mark in wet clay. And the man swaying under the mushroom no longer seemed to know whose fingers were closed around his own. Whatever cold thing Arya had named on the road was already here at my gate, wearing my ruined rival like a glove. "Everyone, get back," I called. "Unfold!" My own scroll snapped open in my fist, and the working I'd built into it on the ride went live between us. A bright seam of light that cracked into being across the mouth of the gate. Not a wall to hold the thing forever, but a breath, the half second I would need to get my people behind me before it reached us. I had prepared it for exactly this, because Arya had told me, and Arya is never wrong about a coming fight, only about which of us it comes for. Karin's great sword swept up level, and she put herself between the beast and the two sisters without being told. Nora's spear dropped into line, the mana skinning bright along its head. Arya's monocle flashed as her sealed eye opened on its own and threw itself forward into the next few seconds, the way it only ever did when something was already reaching to kill us. She said a single word to me, low and fast, telling me where it would strike first. I moved before she finished saying it. The quiet was gone. In the space of one breath, the reckoning I had carried to this gate for the length of the whole long climb had turned into the battle Arya had seen coming on the road, the wind across the wilderness, the two men, and somewhere back behind the pale thing rising over my ruined rival, that cold hand I still had not seen, reaching in across all of it for my home. The beast lunged, and the night came apart. The beast came down at me pale and huge, and I did not step back. I had the scroll open before Roderick had finished tearing his. "Grinding," I said, and the word did the rest. A vortex opened off my hand, a narrow turning tornado stitched all through with diamond dust, glittering even in the dark. It caught the mushroom beast across its bowed crown and took it apart in a single pass, stalk and cap and cold and all, before its weight ever reached me. Where a thing taller than a man had loomed, there was a wet ribbon on the wind, and then not even that. Roderick surfaced from his own shriek and swept his arm down at the ground. The earth answered him. Mushrooms punched up through the trampled dirt by the dozen, then the 100, swelling, splitting, growing little pale hands and little pale feet, tearing themselves loose of the soil and lurching for me in a lumpy, staggering tide. A whole army, grown in the time it takes to draw one breath. That wrong cold came off them in a wave, the cold with no source I could ever name. I did not hate them for it. They had not asked to be pulled up out of the dark. "Sorry," I told them, and I meant it. "I have to clear you away." Then, louder, to the scroll. "Grinding, release the limit, maximum." The vortex I had let die roared back at twice the size, a standing wall of turning silver taller than the gate, and I walked it sideways through the whole swarm. It ground them down the way a mill grinds wheat. No screams, no blood, just an army one moment and a fine wet nothing the next. The spray of what was left rode the wind back the way it had come and caught Roderick full across the front and knocked him flat on his back in the muck of his own making. Behind me, nobody had moved to help. Nobody had needed to. "Ruthless as ever," Karin said, easy, planted on her greatsword with both gauntlets folded on the pommel. Nora had not even bothered to level her spear. Arya watched through the one open eye of her lens and let out a slow breath that was almost a laugh. Roderick came up out of the pulp, spitting it from his mouth, howling that I had destroyed his beautiful mushrooms, that I would pay for every single one. He clawed another scroll from inside his coat with a shaking hand. I waited. I had learned, over this long night, to wait for him. This scroll he did not tear in a rage. He unrolled it, slow, like a man laying down a last card. Out of it grew a single mushroom the size of a house, red, swollen, bumped all over its cap, and venting a thick purple smoke that did not behave the way smoke should. It sank. It rolled down off the cap and spread low across the ground, feeling outward toward us the way water finds its level. And under its cover, Roderick turned and limped away into the dark. Arya went after him. She was 3 strides gone before I caught her by the arm. "Don't," I said. "That smoke could be poison. Breathe it and we lose you, not him." She stopped. She hated stopping. I felt it in the pull of her arm, but she stopped. I did not chase him either. I worked. Purification. Released the seal. The scroll opened wide, and the air itself came apart under it. The good air separating out clean from the bad. A clear pocket holding around us, while the purple was herded off into a wall of itself and pinned there, unable to reach a single lung. Then I turned a second scroll on the giant mushroom and drew its light down to one white point, a lance of focused brightness, hot as a forge inside that sealed pocket, and I set it to the cap. The whole thing caught and burned down fast, from a house to an ash heap in moments. The pooled toxin I drew in after and shut into a flask. Good material. Nothing I made ever went to waste, not even this. Nora's far sight fixed on the dark where he had gone. "Straight ahead," she said, "running hard, northeast." I opened my mouth to send someone after him. I never finished the order. Arya's sealed eye flew open on its own, and she cried out. Not a word, just a warning torn out of her before the sight had even finished arriving. And Nora's head snapped up, past the gate, past the tree line, to the sky. The stars were going out, not clouds. Wings. The whole northern sky was filling in edge to edge with wings, a swarm so wide it had no ends I could find, pouring down out of the black in one vast single body. And the thin moon went behind it, and the night went darker still. The sound reached us a heartbeat later. A low roaring rush like a river stood on end and falling. "Armor salmon," Nora said, and for the first time in a long while, her flat voice cracked clean through. "With wings, it's an evolution stampede." I knew those fish. Rock-hard scale that turned a spear. The ones we plucked out of the river all season long. They had no business in the sky. Something had overfed them, poured mana into their water richer than any river ever runs. Rich enough to twist a whole spawning run into this. And I knew the taste of that richness the way you know your own 2 hands. I had distilled it. Somewhere upstream, a great deal of my own concentrated solution had gone into the water, and the water had made this, and now this was coming down on my home. The swarm split as it fell. One arm bent down toward the camp, toward us. The other poured on southward over the hills in the long direction of the capital, and it did not slow, and it did not thin. I stood there one full heartbeat with the whole sky coming down, and I understood exactly whose leavings had built it. Karen was already moving, already lord and not friend. She named the enemy loud enough for the whole gate to hear, Sky Salmon, and she gave her orders in the voice that never once got argued with. Arya and Nora forward to scout and to cut. Herself to the center, to hold command and get the helpless underground. Me to the square, to end it. Then she looked at me, just looked. One hard question in it, and no words at all. Northeast, the dark where Roderick had run. Chasing him was the correct, sensible thing. He had come here to kill me and everyone I loved. He was hurt, he was slow, and he was getting away clean. And no one alive would have blamed the man who went and finished it in the dark. Arya said it out loud for me. "No, Rust, Roderick should die here. I saw it. He can't be let to run." I heard her. I believed her. I still shook my head. "I'll hold the camp," I said. "Roderick I can deal with whenever he crawls back up. Tonight, there are people under this sky who can't deal with anything at all." She had told me once that some choices come as a matched pair. The best thing you could possibly do and the worst thing you could possibly do. And the two of them weighing out exactly the same. This was that one. I knew it even while I chose. I let the man who had just tried to murder us run off into the dark, and I turned my back on him on purpose. And whatever that cost me later, I would carry it later. Karen's eyes eased half a degree. She had spent her whole life braced to shoulder the losses alone. Not tonight. "Arya, enough," she barked. "That's a wartime order. Move." Understood. Moving out. Nora already had her sister by the sleeve. They went. I told Arya sorry in my head, where she couldn't argue it, and I ran for the square. The lane was already a killing ground. A salmon bigger than any we had ever hauled from the river folded its wings and dropped at me like a thrown anvil, and the ground in front of me erupted green. A wall of thorned vines snapped up out of the dirt, took the salmon on 100 barbs, tore it apart in the air, and dragged the pieces down under the earth before they could land. Rose, watching over me the way she always did, without being asked once. "Thank you," I told her, one hand flat against the nearest vine. and I kept running. The square was where Karin had chosen to make her stand, and she was worth the whole line by herself. I came into it and stopped a half second just to watch her work. In that black meteor iron plate, she was a moving wall, and I understood the armor for the first time. It was never for protection. It was ballast. It was the only thing heavy enough to anchor that impossible strength of hers behind a swing so it didn't tear her off her own feet. Her greatsword, near as tall as she stood, came around in one flat arc and took 3 salmon out of the air at a stroke. She waded straight into a knot of them, and they came apart around her like water around a plow. The Black Bull of War. I had heard the name for years. I finally saw where it had come from. A rider broke through the swarm off the North Road at a dead gallop, blade already out, cutting salmon from the sky on the way in. Silver hair, blue robes, a sword that moved like it had somewhere it needed to be. Terra. She had sworn me that blade a long time ago now, on a lakeshore, against a calamity she could not yet name. Here it was. Here she was, come to pay it to the letter. She wheeled her mount in beside me and put her back to mine like she had done it 1,000 times. You have your calamity, she said. I told you the sword would come when it was needed. Forgive me that I am nearly late. You're on time, I said. Take the west side. Karin has the east. She was gone into the fight before I had finished the sentence. Karin's voice carried over the din, asking, was I ready? I checked the one thing that mattered before anything else. One question, I called back. The non-combatants. Underground, she shouted. Every one of them, sealed in the food stores beneath the earth, safe from anything that came out of the sky. Reed and his men on the door. Good. I let out the breath I had been holding since the stars went dark. Then let's begin. I reached into my coat and drew out 9 scrolls at once, and I let them go. They did not fall. They rose up off my open hands and spread into a slow ring around me, turning in the air, each one unrolling itself as it went, until I stood in the center of a wheel of 9 open scrolls, all of them facing out. I had made rows for expeditions, years and years ago, a plan to build a comfortable camp wherever I happened to drop my pack. I had never once told a living soul what else she could do when I gave her room enough. Manifest rose. All 9 scrolls answered in the same instant. Thornvine erupted out of every one of them, not from the ground now, but straight out of the empty air, out of 9 mouths at once. A green storm of barbed cable lashing in every direction across the whole square. It caught the swarm the way a net catches a shoal. The sky salmon came apart in the air by the dozen, then the score, faster than an eye could follow them. The entire square swept clean in the time it took Karin to lower her sword and grin at me across it. Fast as ever, she called, and she almost sounded disappointed. Barely any time's passed. I've hardly gotten to cut loose. Nora, leaning on her spear now, the fight already gone from her side of the square, said only, beautiful. Arya breathed. To unfold that many at once, I was not finished. The square was clear. The camp was not. Now, I said, time to clear them out. Scrolls, scatter. 8 of the 9 peeled off the ring and shot up into the night in 8 directions. Out over the tents, over the walls, each one trailing living vine behind it, each one hunting on its own. The last stayed turning at my shoulder. And all across the camp, from one edge of the dark to the other, the green went to work. I was not there for the worst of it. Reed told it to me after, enough times that I can see the whole thing anyway. He had his men in a tight ring over the storage door, shoulder to shoulder, all the helpless folk sealed in the dark beneath their boots. The sky salmon came at them in waves. Reed swung an axe that had never once failed him, and it bounced off a salmon's hide without so much as scoring it. Beside him, the big bald fighter with the iron knuckles was shouting to be let out as a decoy, to draw the swarm off and buy the rest of them a breath. One of his men said it flat. They couldn't win this, not against these. Then something small and bright came sailing in through a gap in the tents. It pulled every eye toward it, and that was very nearly the end of them, because the ring bent to look, and the swarm hit the bend where it bent. Men went down. A salmon folded its wings and dropped straight at Reed, and Reed set his feet to meet it with an axe he already knew would not bite. The scroll opened first. Thornvine tore out of it and filled the whole span of air over the storage door, and every sky salmon inside that circle came apart at once, shredded, gone, dropped in loose pieces around men who had not landed a single killing blow between the lot of them. Reed knew the vine on sight. He knew exactly whose it was. He looked up, and 8 more scrolls were climbing the sky over the camp, each one spilling that same green ruin, each one wiping another piece of the swarm out of the air. He had bled to hold that door, and a master alchemist he had never once fully measured had reached clear across the whole camp without leaving the square, and done in a single blink what his whole line could not do in an hour. A monster was nothing, he said to me later, still half in disbelief. Nothing at all, next to a man like that. It was over faster than it had any right to be. The scrolls came back to me one at a time out of the dark, rolled themselves shut, and dropped into my hands spent. The last of the wings stopped falling. Where an army had swallowed the whole sky, there was only quiet now, and torch smoke, and my people standing up out of their crouches to find that they were somehow still alive. Karen planted her sword and leaned on it and laughed, filthy and delighted, griping that the fight had gone and ended before she'd even warmed up. Tara wiped her blade clean and bowed her head to me once. The debt paid, and both of us knowing it was. Nora and Arya came in off the perimeter, tired down to the bone and whole. Nobody was missing. I made myself count them twice before I let myself believe it. Then I looked south. The other arm of the swarm was still going, a dark smear low on the far horizon, pouring on over the hills toward the capital without us, toward the city that had cut me loose, toward the guild that had called my work worthless and poured the rest of it into a river. I had held my ground. I had not held theirs. I found, standing there, that I could not make myself care about theirs. I stood in the middle of the square I had just kept, with the family I had gathered close around me, and the walls still standing, and every last one of the helpless climbing back up out of the earth alive. For years I had only wanted a place where my work meant something to somebody. Now I had one, and the people in it. And tonight, I had stood in front of all of it and not given up a single soul. Building the thing had been the easy half. This was the half that proved it was mine. Roderick was still out there somewhere in the dark. The sky was still full of what my own hands had made without knowing it, riding on toward a city that had no idea yet it was coming. Tomorrow, those were mine to answer. Tonight, the line held. By the time the light came up, the last of my scrolls had crawled home across the square and rolled itself shut against my boot. I bent and picked it up, warm, the way they always were after hard work, and empty. Nothing was moving in the sky anymore. That was the strangest part. For a whole night, the sky had been the enemy, and now it was just the sky, going pale at one edge, with a little smoke smearing across it that the wind was already taking apart. Karen came across the square with her greatsword over one shoulder and her helm under the other arm, and she was grinning like a woman who had been cheated of a second helping. That's it? That's the calamity everyone lost sleep over? She planted the sword point down and leaned on it. I hardly landed 20 good swings. You landed enough, I told her. Tara had come in off the west line on foot, sword sheathed now, silver hair stuck to her temple with the work of the night. She stopped in front of me and put a fist to her chest, and the bow she gave was the short formal kind her order used when a thing was finished and finished right. The debt is paid, she said quietly. I told you the sword would come when it was needed. It came. It did, I said. And then, because she looked like she needed to hear it more than I needed to say it, you were early, if anything. Nora drifted up with her spear across her shoulders, and both wrists hooked over it, the pale frames sitting crooked on her face. She looked north, then east, then south, checking with those eyes the way other people crack their knuckles. Nothing left standing out there, she reported, flat as ever, for a long way. A pause. Good, they were all whole. I made myself say that plainly in my own head, because a part of me had spent the whole night braced for it not to be true. Karen, Tara, Nora. Arya coming across the square last with the monocle sealing her left eye shut, walking a little careful, but walking. Reed and his men had held the storage, and everyone who had gone down under it had come back up. Nobody was missing. I had counted, and then I had counted again, and the number had stayed the same both times. And it was the only number I had ever been glad to sit still. For years, I had wanted one thing badly enough that I never once said it out loud. Not credit, not a title, just a place where the work I did with my hands mattered to somebody who was standing next to me when I did it. I was standing in that place. It had walls I had helped raise, and people in it the world had thrown out before I ever got there, and it had held. The camp was waking up around all of it. Doors I had helped hang were swinging open, and people came out into the cold to see the sky empty and the walls still standing, and the sound they made was not a cheer. It was quieter than that, and better. The low, ragged murmur of a place counting itself and finding the count came out whole. Reed had the storage open already and was hauling the morning's bread up into the light as if the night behind us had been an ordinary one. A fighter with his sword arm strapped across his chest lifted his good hand to me as I crossed the square. I stopped and checked the strapping because it was a thing I could do with my hands, and doing something with my hands has always been easier for me than standing still. He thanked me. Half the camp thanked me that morning for the walls or the water or the vines or nothing they could quite name, and I let them. And none of it sat as strange in my chest as the thing I did not yet know, already moving up the road toward me out of the south. Arya stopped at my side and looked south with me, down the long dark road that ran toward the distant capital. Her sealed eyes stayed sealed, but her mouth had gone thin. "He ran that way," she said. Not a question. "He did. You could have ended it last night." "I know." I turned the empty scroll over in my hands. "I chose the wall instead." She was quiet a moment. "I saw a little of what that costs," she said. "Not all of it. Enough to wish you had chosen the other thing." Then she let it go, the way she let most things go, and leaned her shoulder lightly against my arm. But the wall held. So, the wall held. Roderick was somewhere south of us, hurt and running. And past him, a long way past him, the second half of that swarm was still in the air, pouring on toward a city I had left behind and could not, standing there in the gold light with my people whole around me, make myself fear for. I did not go south after him. There was nothing south of me I wanted. What happened down that road, I did not see with my own eyes. I put it together afterward, out of what the trade roads carried up to us, and what the capital had left behind to tell. This is how it went. Roderick ran until running stopped working. He had gotten clear of us under his own smoke, and kept going into the dark on foot. And the whole time he was talking, not to anyone, to the road, to the wind, to the version of me he kept in his head to lose arguments with. I would pay for this. Everyone near me would pay. He was a master of the guild, and I was a talentless nobody who had gotten lucky with a bottle of water, and the world had it backward, and he was going to set it right. Somewhere in the small hours, the wound caught up to him. I do not know exactly what the night at the gate had done to him, and I am not going to pretend to. He had walked into that fight already carrying something he would not show, and he walked out of it carrying it worse. He stopped in the dark and drank one of his own potions, the high-grade kind he had always sneered at the rest of us for not being able to afford. It did nothing. He drank another. That did nothing either. Whatever was wrong in him had gone somewhere his craft could not follow, down past the place potions reach, and he stood on the empty road understanding for the first time that he could not fix himself. That was when the panic came in under the rage. He could not mend it, but the guild could. The guild in the capital kept the highest grade remedies in the kingdom locked in its own vaults, the ones even a master had to sign for. If he could reach the capital, he could reach the vaults. He clung to that the way a drowning man clings to the one board still floating. He tore a scroll and called up a mount, some long, swift summon thing built for distance, and dragged himself onto its back, and it carried him south far faster than his legs ever could. He did not know what was already ahead of him on that road. He could not have. He rode toward the capital thinking of the vaults, thinking of the remedies, thinking of the day he would come back north and make me sorry. And the whole time, he was riding straight into the second wave, the arm of the stampede that had split off from the camp and gone on. The same beasts, the same swarm his own guild had fed, and mine had turned back. They were converging on the capital ahead of him, and he was hurrying to catch them. He dismissed the mount outside the gates, out of some last scrap of pride, and walked in on his own 2 feet. He did not get far before the pride stopped mattering. The capital was wrong. He had left a city. He came back to a wound in the shape of a city. The great avenues he had ridden down 100 times were torn open. Shop fronts caved in. Awnings down in the street. A cart on its side with nobody bothering to right it. It was the kind of damage a monster raid leaves. The kind the capital was supposed to be far too strong and far too central to ever suffer. People moved through it slow and gray-faced, stepping around things, not talking much. Somewhere the swarm had been beaten back off the city at last, driven up and away before it finished the whole of it, and by the look of the sky, it had cost. But it had come too late to matter to the one place Roderick was walking toward. He did not understand yet. He kept walking, faster now, that thin-held smile pulling tighter on his face, telling himself the guild would be fine. The guild was always fine. The guild was the oldest and richest institution in the kingdom, backed by the crown, walled and warded and staffed by the finest alchemists alive. Whatever had rolled through the outer city, the guild would be standing over it untouched, the way it had stood over everything for longer than he had been alive. He turned the last corner, onto the wide, clean approach where the Alchemy Guild had stood his entire working life, and he stopped. There was nothing there, not a ruin with the walls still up and the roof gone, nothing. The building he had walked into every morning for most of his life, the high halls and the vault floors, and the president's office up top with its wall of ledgers, all of it was down. A field of broken stone where a mountain of an institution had been. The swarm had come down on the capital, drawn to something inside that place, and with no master-grade wall left to stand behind, the guild that had always been fine had not been fine at all. It had fallen like anything else falls when there is finally nobody left in it who can actually do the work. Roderick went down onto his knees in the rubble. I am told he said it out loud, over and over, the The way a man says a thing to keep it from being true. It's a lie. It's a lie. My whole life's work. And here, I will tell one thing I cannot know, because it is the only fair way to end his part of it. Kneeling there in the wreck of the only place that had ever told him he mattered, some cold part of him must finally have done the arithmetic he had spent a career refusing to do. The department they had gutted to pay for his fire guns. The basic research floor they had called dead weight. The distilled water nobody would sign their name to. The concentrate they had poured down the river to be rid of it. All of it. Every cut. Tracing back to the same small decision, made over and over, that the quiet, careful, unglamorous work was worth nothing, and the man who did it was worth less. The swarm that took the guild had been grown out of the thing they threw away. The wall that could have turned it aside had been a man they had thrown away first. He had helped throw him. He knelt in the proof of it, because I will tell you what that place had been to me. They had called me a gopher. Not once, not in anger, but as a fact, the way you name a tool. Roderick said it on the way to the president's office, and nobody in the room thought to correct him. I made 1,000 bottles a day, and not one of them carried my name. There had been a whole floor of us once. The basic research department, unfashionable work, slow work, the kind that fills a shelf with sealed bottles, and never once fills a hall with applause. We distilled the water the weapon floors ran on. We ran the tests nobody else wanted to run, and kept the records nobody wanted to read. And we did it well, year after quiet year, because the work was worth doing, whether or not anyone in the building ever clapped. The guild looked at that floor and did not see craftsmen. It saw an expense, a line to be trimmed. So they trimmed it and moved the money to Roderick's fire guns and the things that looked well in the president's yearly reports. And every season, there were fewer of us, until there was mostly just me, checking the last bottle in a room that used to be full. And when they wanted to reward that department for being the cheapest, quietest, most reliable floor in the whole guild, they cut its budget and they kept cutting it, until the morning I checked that last bottle and the number on the sheet had gone all the way down to 0. Be grateful, they told me. Be grateful we are not firing you outright. I was not grateful. I left. And now the number was 0 again. Only this time it was not a budget line. It was the whole of them. The ledgers and the vaults and the president behind his polished desk. The master ranks who had measured a man's worth in billable output and found me short. The whole proud institution that had handed me a 0 and told me to thank them for it. All of it gone to 0. Reduced to the exact figure they had once written next to my name. I had not lifted a hand against them. I had walked north and built something, and the thing they discarded had come back down the sky and collected the debt in full. And I had been asleep on my feet in a square many days' ride to the north when it happened. I stood in that square now, with the empty scroll still in my hand, and let the whole of it settle. Somewhere south of me, a man was on his knees in the wreck of the thing that had thrown us both away, and I could not go and stand over it, even if some small part of me had wanted to, because I had a camp to feed, and hurt men to see to, and a familiar to call in and fold away for the day. That, in the end, was the whole difference between Roderick and me. He had ridden his whole life toward that building, and found nothing at the end of it but the ruin. I had walked away from it with a backpack and a scroll, and I had a morning's work waiting for me, and people who would be glad to see me do it. I felt no joy in it. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to lie and say I laughed. I did not laugh. I felt something colder and quieter and heavier than that. A thing settling all the way down and going still, like a scale that has finally stopped swinging because both pans have come to rest even. It was over. The part of my life that had begun with the word gopher and a budget of 0 was over, and it had ended without my help, and I was still standing. That is where my part of it ends, and where I have to stop pretending I know what came next, because no one carried this last piece up the road to me. There was no one left near enough to carry it. But this is what the capital believed happened, in the low voices people use for the things they only half saw, and I have come to believe it too. Roderick was still on his knees in the rubble when the street around him went quiet. Not the quiet of an emptied city, a different quiet, the kind that falls on a place when everyone in it has decided, all at once and without a word, to look somewhere else. Someone was standing over him, a figure in a long hooded robe that fell all the way to the broken stone, come out of the gray crowd without any of the crowd seeming to have noticed him arrive. The hood was up. There was no face inside it, or none that anyone could later say they had seen. He stood over the ruined man with the ease of someone arriving exactly on the day he had circled on a calendar a long time ago. No one in that street looked straight at him. That was the thing people came back to, after, when they could be got to speak of it at all. A whole avenue of dazed survivors, and not one of them could hold their eyes on the hooded man for longer than a breath, the way you cannot hold your hand in a flame and call it choice. Something came off him that the body body understood before the mind did, a wrongness with no name and no edge to it, the same cold that had reached through Roderick's summonings at my gate. Only here it had no beast to wear, and so it simply hung in the failing light around the robe and waited, and the street felt it and looked away, and told itself it had seen nothing at all. He greeted Roderick almost kindly, called him by his old title, the master he had been, and turned the word into something with a hook in it, remarked, in that mild carrying way, on how very far a man could fall in a single season. And then, while Roderick knelt there too emptied out to run, the hooded figure thanked him for the circuits. Those defective boards Roderick had shipped out through the guild without a second look, the ones that had gone astray and come back and, somewhere in their going, ruined a plan this hooded man had been laying for a long time. It was him. The cold that had reached through Roderick's mushrooms at the gate, the mark that had once been carved into a knight left dying in the grass, the shadow that had been standing one room back behind every disaster of the last season, all of it one hand, and the hand belonged to the shape now leaning over the last piece it needed. He said he owed Roderick thanks. He said, worse, that he had a use for him now. A gift, he called it, the way you might call a cage a home. Roderick did not resist. I do not think, by then, there was enough left of him to resist with. Whatever was said after that was said low, and whatever was done in the failing light, with the hood turned so no one could see. And the few who were near enough to feel it turned their faces away and kept them turned. The story stops at the edge of it. It is meant to. Some things you do not put on the page. When it was finished, the hooded figure straightened, glanced once toward the north road, as if a particular swordswoman he had no wish to meet might come down it, and drew back into the crowd the way he had come out of it. And only after he was well gone did the street find its ordinary noise again, cartwheels and voices and a dog somewhere, the sound of a city that had already decided to forget what it had just stood next to. So that is the whole of it, or the whole of it I can tell. The guild that called me a gopher is a field of stone. The men who wrote my worth as 0 were paid in kind, to the number, and I never lifted a hand. The wall held, the